Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. We're going to start day 2 here of Intro to DaVinci Resolve. We're going to pick up today. We're going to do some transitions and effects in the edit page. So we're going to learn how to add some cross dissolves, do some retiming, do a little bit of keyframing as well to get some animation in there. Then we're going to switch our focus to do some audio in the edit page to begin with. So how do we approach audio from a very basic level? And we'll move to a little bit maybe more advanced stuff. We'll definitely get a little bit more advanced as we go into the Fairlight page. And I'm hoping to get through most of the Fairlight page. I don't expect to get through all of the Fairlight page today. So it probably will bleed over into tomorrow, just so you know. If you're interested in audio, we'll definitely do a lot of it today, but you might want to pop in tomorrow too, if that's what you're interested in. So that's kind of our plan for today. If you're following along in the PDF that you have, this is going to be lesson 7 in the PDF. It's going to continue with the same project that we started yesterday, although we are going to import a brand new timeline. So this is going to be lesson 7 in the PDF. It's all about transitions and effects in the edit page. So if you don't mind right now, we are going to go to DaVinci Resolve. So you might want to launch that and get to your project manager just like we had yesterday. If you have your project manager up, you want to double click on that Age of Airplanes project that we created yesterday. So just go ahead and double click on Age of Airplanes. That should bring you back to where we started. I'm going to shrink my screen a little bit so it doesn't cut off at the bottom for you. Hopefully that is a better view. Hopefully it's clearer than yesterday. And hopefully I sound a little bit better. So hopefully you're all opened now in DaVinci Resolve with your Age of Airplane project. What we're going to do is start off just so that me and Diego and Arthur all know what you're looking at. So we're looking at the same thing. Once you have Age of Airplanes open, make sure that your edit page is selected down below at the bottom of the screen. You'll see the edit button. You want to make sure that that edit page button is selected. We're going to stay for most of the day on the edit page. If you're there with me, the next thing I want you to do is go up to the workspace menu. We've done this a number of times. We're going to continue to do it a number of times because it's an easy way to get everyone to look at the same screen in the same layout. What I'd like you to do is go to the workspace menu at the top of the menu bar, come down to where it says Reset UI Layout, right? This just gives us the default view in the edit page, and it makes it easier for me and Arthur and Diego to understand what you're looking at least initially. So go ahead and choose Reset UI Layout from the workspace menu. Now what we're going to do is we are going to import a brand new timeline to work on. It's still going to be Age of Airplanes, but it's going to be kind of pre-configured for you in case any of the trimming went wrong for you or something like that, or maybe you didn't finish yesterday. Don't worry about it. We are going to import a brand new timeline. To begin with, we want to make sure that our timeline goes into our rough cut bin. So I'm going to come over to the left-hand side where my media pool is, and I'm going to click on the rough cuts bin, because when I import anything, it's going to go into the selected bin. So since I'm going to import a timeline, I want to import that and have it go into the rough cuts bin. So with your rough cuts bin selected, you can now go into the file menu at the top, and we can begin by importing this timeline. So go down to Import Timeline. We did this yesterday, right? file, import timeline. We brought in a timeline for yesterday. We're going to do the same thing today. When this window comes up, what you're going to have to do is navigate down to your R17 Beginner Guide Lessons folder, wherever you saved that folder. Do you remember where you saved that R17 Beginner's Guide Lessons that you downloaded? I'd like you to select that folder wherever it may be in your documents and your downloads, or you put it on a different drive. Select that folder. Like I said, we're working on lesson 7, so I'm going to go down to lesson 7 and select that. In lesson 7, what you're going to see is a document called chapter 7 fx.drt. And we talked about yesterday a DRP file, which was a DaVinci Resolve project file. That's a project that contains bins and timelines and clips and all of the entire project. This is just a DRT file, a DaVinci Resolve timeline. It is just a timeline, right? So I'm going to select that chapter 7 effects DRT and then choose open to import it into my rough cuts bin. It will come in, and since all of the clips that make up this imported timeline already exist in a bin in Resolve, Resolve just relinks it automatically. It goes through and it looks at the clips in the timeline and it looks in your bins and say, do these clips already exist? And if they do, it links them back up. All right, so this is a pretty similar timeline to what we had yesterday. All the same, pretty much the same layout and the same clips, but it may be a little bit modified just so we can add some effects. But basically, you'll see it as the same thing. The first thing you might want to do is just learn how to create a fade up. Maybe I just want to create a fade at the beginning of my timeline. So go ahead and in your timeline, move your playhead to the very beginning of the timeline. I just want to create a fade up. So one thing you can do is just move your mouse pointer over the thumbnail of that clip in the timeline, the very first clip in the timeline. Just move your mouse pointer over it. When you do that, you'll notice in the upper left and right-hand corner of that segment, you'll see these little white handles. Those are fade handles. So if I just want to create a fade up on the beginning, I'll come over to that little white handle in the upper left-hand corner of the clip, and I'll just drag that handle in. Maybe I just want to have a simple, half-second, 12-frame fade up. So just drag that handle in where it says 12 frames. This is a 24-frame project, so that's going to be a half-second long. You can let go and just play a little brief few seconds.
In this film,
right? You can see how it just quickly fades up.
In this film,
really easy, really simple thing to do. That's just a simple fade. Let's add a cross dissolve. I'm going to add a cross dissolve first by moving to, in the timeline, sort of in the middle. Let me turn off that scrubbing so you don't get annoyed by it. I'm going to go into the middle of my timeline. You can look up here. It's that 10 Kenya clip. You can just go to the very beginning of that 10 Kenya clip, that big blue clip right in the middle of your timeline. This is a nice kind of blue shot here. And if I play it for you, and you don't have to play it, you can just look up here in Zoom. I'm going to mute the music since you don't need to hear the music as I play it for you. If I play this, it goes from this nice blue shot to this kind of stark white. Maybe I'd like to add a cross dissolve between these two just to make it not so jarring of a cut. So how do I add a cross dissolve in Resolve? Well, the first thing you do is you have to select the cut point that you want to add the transition to. And the way you do that is you just come down to the cut point between the 10 Kenya and the 02 A380 takeoff. And as if you're going to perform a rolling trim, position your mouse pointer directly over that cut point. Just like, remember yesterday when we were doing a rolling trim, you got that double-sided trim cursor. You want that same thing when you're adding a dissolve or a cross dissolve here, and you're going to click down on that cut point. You should have a green handle on both sides if you selected it correctly. You're just selecting the cut point as if you're trimming it, but you're not going to trim it. This is just selecting the cut point so we can add a cross dissolve there. So once you have it selected, you can now go up to the timeline menu. Of course, you can use a keyboard shortcut, but I'll show you the timeline menu first. I'm going to go up to the timeline menu in the menu bar, and the very first thing in that timeline menu is add transition, right? I'm in the timeline menu, and that first thing is add transition. The keyboard shortcut is Command T or Control T. You can use that as well. And go ahead and just select that from the timeline menu. You'll see a little white outline that gets added to your timeline. It's much easier to see it if you zoom in. So I'm going to use my magnification slider in the upper right of my timeline toolbar, or if you want to do Command plus, Control plus, you can zoom in that way too. Zoom in enough until you can see the word cross dissolve right over our cross dissolve icon. So zoom in enough so you can see the label cross dissolve on it. And you just added a cross dissolve to that cut point. You can back up and play over it if you want. You just back up the playhead and play. And you'll have a nice little cross dissolve there. Now, it's going to give you a default duration. It's going to give you a default 1 second duration. You can change the default setting. It's in your settings. But if you want to just change this one instance, maybe you want it longer or shorter, you can come over to the right edge of that cross dissolve boundary. You can look up here and zoom where I am. See where my mouse is right over the edge. It changes to a resize cursor. I'm just going to move my playhead out of the way. See how my pointer changes to a resize cursor when I'm over the right boundary edge? That means you can resize the transition right there in the timeline. Just click and start dragging it out or making it shorter by shrinking it. I'm going to drag it out a little bit, maybe 10 frames. Let's add 10 frames to this cross dissolve. You can see a little tooltip at the top is saying +10, just making it that much longer. The total duration is underneath 1 second and 20 frames. You might ask yourself, if I only added 10 frames, why is it 1 second and 20 frames? Because it's 10 frames on either side of the cut, right? It's a stretching out to the left and it's stretching out to the right. So if you drag 10 frames out, it's 10 frames out to the left and to the right. So it's 20 frames total. Now that you've done that, you could go and play it back. It's just a longer cross dissolve. If you want to do any more customization to this transition, what you can do is go into the inspector. I'm going to come down into my cross dissolve, right on the word cross dissolve. Just double click on it. I just went down into my timeline where the label cross dissolve was and just double clicked on it. It opens up the inspector over here on the right. You can also come up to the very top here and just click on the word inspector. That will do it too. In the upper right corner, there's inspector. Here you have all the controls. You can see in the timeline, the cross dissolve is outlined in red. That means it's selected. If the cross dissolve is selected, the controls in the inspector are going to be for the cross dissolve, right? You have duration. You can change the duration there, the alignment of it, the style of it. So if I want to change this from a linear kind of video dissolve, I'm going to click on the style menu in my inspector and come down and make it a film dissolve. Film dissolve has a slightly different response curve than a linear video dissolve. So I'm going to choose a film dissolve. And maybe underneath that where it says ease, I want it to ease in and ease out. So I'm going to come down and choose ease in and ease out from the ease menu. Right? Just two very simple little menu items right there. And we've customized our cross dissolve. If you want to play over it, you can just back up your playhead and play to see what it looks like. very nice. It's a beautiful cross dissolve. I did a lot of customization to this, and to the point where I've done enough customization there where I might want to save this cross dissolve. I might want to save it so I can reuse instead of applying the default cross dissolve and having to go into the inspector every time to get this. I might say, no, this is my, cinematic cross dissolve or my. So I want to save it as my custom dissolve. Well, how do I do that? Well, you come into the timeline, go right where the name is, cross dissolve, and right click over it. I'm just right clicking in the timeline over the cross dissolve. And in that menu, you'll see down towards the bottom, it says create transition preset. So again, how did I find it? I just moved my mouse over the cross dissolve in the timeline. I right click over it, come down to the bottom of that right click menu, that contextual menu, and it will say create transition preset. When you choose to create the transition preset, go ahead and choose that. It will come up with a little name dialog where you can name this. Let's call it my cross dissolve. That's not very original. My cross dissolve. Final, right? Because I have a final, I have my cross dissolve final, but this is the final. Once you name it, go ahead and say okay. And that is how you save a custom transition preset. So you can reuse it over and over. But where does it go? Well, it goes in what's called the effect library. The effect library is found in the upper left-hand corner above your media pool. You'll see the term effect library up there. You can just click on the effect library. It will open up below the media pool. On the left-hand side, you have all different categories: video transitions, audio transitions, titles, generators, and all the way down. We're going to choose video transitions in the sidebar. These are now all of your video transitions. And to find ours, the custom one we saved, go ahead and scroll down the list. You'll eventually come to a user category, and you'll see your user category cross dissolve right there. And that is where all of your custom transitions will show up in the effects library. In the case of transitions, it will show up in the video transitions category. And then you'll find your user area, and that's where all of yours will be listed. You can go one step further. What if you wanted this custom dissolve? If you're doing a long program, you'd like the look of all your cross dissolve to be consistent. You don't want some to be linear and some to look like this. You'd like to have a consistency among them. Maybe you'd like this cross dissolve to be the default cross dissolve whenever you add a cross dissolve from the timeline menu or use the command key shortcut. Well, you can do that by coming over to your cross dissolve in the effects library. Just go over to it, right click over it, and you'll see a little menu that says set as standard transition. You don't have to select that. I just want to show you where it is. If you choose set as standard transition, it's going to make this cross dissolve, the one you right clicked over, the default cross dissolve. The one that is applied when you select it from the timeline menu or do Command T, Control T to apply it. Really handy if you want a consistent look and you've customized the dissolves. The effects library has lots of effects in there that you can try out, lots of different wipes, DVE moves. I'm going to scroll to the top of my video transitions where it has all the dissolves. I'm just scrolling in the scroll bar here all the way to the top. You can see it as additive dissolve, blur dissolve. You can try any one of these by just moving your mouse pointer over them, and the viewer will give you a preview. If you just move your mouse over, I'm using blur dissolve because that's a nice one to see in the viewer. I'm just moving my mouse back and forth over the name blur dissolve. And you can see in the viewer exactly what it looks like. So it gives you a little preview as you move backwards and forwards over that blur dissolve in the effects library. And you can decide if you want to apply it or not. If we want to replace our cross dissolve with that blur dissolve, just drag the blur dissolve on top of the cross dissolve in the timeline. We're just dragging from the effects library onto the cross dissolve that you added into the timeline. It's much easier if you've zoomed in on it to target that in the timeline. And then you can just let go, and now all of a sudden that cross dissolve you added is now changed to a blur dissolve. All right. I'm going to take a look at my entire timeline. Do you remember from yesterday how to view the entire timeline in your timeline window? It was zoom to fit, Shift Z. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and tap on Z to see my entire timeline. Kind of zooms back out. I'm going to move my playhead down 2 or 3 clips, depending on where your playhead is, down to the beginning of this Bay Area lights clip. It's the 4th clip from the end, and I'm right at the beginning of it. If you want to Shift Z again, then it will zoom back in to that Bay Area lights, just so you can see it a little bit more clearly. Instead of adding a dissolve or a transition effect there, I'd like to add just a simple effect, maybe like a subtle effect that will enhance this shot, right? Not a transition, but I wanted to apply to the entire clip. To do that, I'm going to come over to my effect library. You're going to see a category called Open Effects. And under Open Effects, you'll see filters. You can select that filter category under Open Effects. Open Effects is the generic plugin architecture that Resolve uses. The filter effects are all the effects that come with Resolve. There's one that I'm looking for called a tilt shift blur. I'm going to scroll down. You can see these are in different categories, all these filters. Resolve effects color, Resolve effects generate, Resolve effects key. Keep scrolling down until you can find the Resolve effects stylize category. Just scroll down that list until you come to the Resolve Effects Stylize category. In that Resolve Effects Stylize category, you'll find a tilt shift blur. Now, I should warn you that some of these effects are only available in DaVinci Resolve Studio, but you can still try them out if you're using the free version. So I'm going to come down. First of all, you can hover your mouse pointer over the effects, just like we did the transition, and preview them, right? Just hover your mouse over any of them and you'll see eventually that it gets a little preview in the window. I'm going to take that tilt shift blur. To apply it, I'm just going to drag it on top of the clip in the timeline. Drag it from the effects library on top of the Bay Area lights clip in the timeline, and then you can let go. If you're on the free version like I am, you're going to get a little dialogue that says, hey, you've reached the limitation of DaVinci Resolve. You can unlock this by upgrading to the studio version, or you can just see if this is what you want. It will have a watermark over it, but you can still use all the controls to see if it does what you need it to do. So if you're on the free version, just click Not Yet. We'll work with it with a watermark over it. If you're on the studio version, you'll have no watermark and you'll be able to see the tilt shift blur clearly. So right now, I want to be able to control what the tilt shift does. If you don't know what a tilt shift blur is, this is just simulating a tilt shift lens that you might put on a camera. That kind of lens effect has usually like a blur at the bottom and a blur at the top. That kind of imitates the tilt shift blur. And you can see I'm going to come down and select the O3 Bay Area lights segment in the timeline. And you'll notice when you select it, the inspector now has controls in there. Things like position and zoom and rotation, but at the top of the inspector, you're going to see these tabs, and one of the tabs is called effects. So if you've applied an effect to a clip, the controls for that effect are in the inspector underneath the effects tab. So go ahead in the inspector, click on the effects tab, and you should see your tilt shift blur effect right at the top there. Now there are lots of controls in here. You can control the blur strength, how blurry is the blurry parts and things like that. I'm not going to get into the different controls, but I do want to show you two things in particular. One is at the top where the name is tilt shift blur, you can see it's in red. There's a little switch to the left of that name. That is an on-off switch. So if you want to bypass this effect, you can just click that switch and now the effect is off, right? It's still applied to the clip, it's just disabled. And if you want to see it again, just click on that red switch there next to the name to see it there. It's a good way to compare before and after, right? I just want to see what this looks like. Click it off, before and after. If you don't want a big watermark, if you're using the free version on your clip, or you just don't like the way this effect looks, over to the right of the name, you're going to see a little trash can. The little trash can icon is the way you can remove the effect from this clip. And that's what we're going to do. We're just going to remove it. So go ahead and click that trash can and it will remove our tilt shift blur from our clip.
Hey, Dion, could you quickly show the search dialog box for the effects library?
Sure. Over in the effects library, right, way over on the left, when we were searching for the tilt shift blur, I made you scroll all the way down. We did it the manual way and looked for it. You could have also, if you knew the name of it, at the top of the search dialog, you'll see a little magnifying glass. If you click on that, you can type in, if you know the name, tilt, right? And it will come up and find your effect. Now, the one thing that you have to remember is this is filtering your effects library. So when you're done, you absolutely want to remember to click the little X to get back to all of your effects. Otherwise, you might click off somewhere and forget that this is filtered, and then you'll be looking for some other effect, and you're wondering, where did all my effects go? I say that from experience. So go ahead and click the little X if you've filtered out the dialog there. And if you want to get rid of the little box where you type in, just click the magnifying glass again, and you'll get rid of that as well. All right. The tilt shift blur wasn't the right effect. What I would like for this is I would like to make this look a little bit more cinematic. It is going to be on television, so it does have to be 16:9 HD aspect ratio, but I'd like it to look a little bit more cinematic by adding letterboxing at the top and the bottom, right? Like a film letterbox to give it that wide screen look. So the way you can do that in Resolve is not an effect at all. It's just by going to the timeline menu, go up to the timeline menu, and go all the way down to the bottom to the very intuitive name, output blanking. Yes, output blanking is how you can apply a letterbox to the entire timeline. It's not just on this one clip. It's going to be applied to the entire timeline. The beauty is it's not really an effect, so you don't have to render it at all. You can just apply it. I'm going to choose something like 239. 239 is a very typical 35 millimeter film aspect ratio. So that's a good cinematic look. So just choose 239 from the output blanking menu. It's in your timeline menu, right? So all I'm doing is I'm going up to the timeline menu, going all the way down to the bottom, and choosing 239 from that submenu. And now if you look in your viewer, you'll see that you have letterboxing up the top and the bottom. It makes it look a little bit more cinematic. I'm going to Shift Z to see the entire timeline, right? Because I'm going to scroll through the timeline, scroll backwards and see that that blanking is on all of the clips. Scroll all the way back to the very first clip, that first interview clip. That blanking looks pretty good. except on the shots of him. It cuts off a little bit too much of his head. Now, this shot wasn't framed correctly for the letterbox, so we're going to have to reframe it a little bit. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is select that very first clip in the timeline, that interview clip. Just click on it to select it. In your inspector, over in the upper right-hand corner, you can see you have position X and Y, right? X is positioning it side to side, Y is positioning it up and down. The thing that you have to know about resolve is even though this is just a number, see how position X is a number and position Y is just a number? We're going to work with position Y because that's going to position him up and down. These number fields right here are really sliders. You can enter a number, but they actually work like sliders. Position your mouse pointer directly over the number, and then you can just click and drag left and right, and you can see that you're changing the value. So instead of having a big slider there, it's just a number field. But anytime you see a number field in Resolve, it works just like a slider. Just click and drag backwards and forward. I'm going to drag to the left until I give him a little bit more headroom. So just drag the position Y value to the left until you think he has enough headroom in the shot. Whatever you feel is the right value on position Y to make that shot look a little bit less like it's cutting off his head. All right. If you have that done, that's great. We have 2 more clips of this interview. And in a real timeline, you could have, 10, 20 different interview shots of him. How do we get this one adjustment onto the remaining interview clips that we have? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy the adjustment from this clip, right? So it's selected in the timeline, right? That first clip in the timeline is selected. You can see the red outline around it. I'm going to very carefully move my mouse up and across over the menu. Remember when I told you yesterday, if you go across the thumbnails, you might accidentally change the viewer. So just be careful and go up to the edit, right? And choose copy. If you don't see copy, it could just mean that you've activated the bin or something. So make sure the clip is, you can also just do Command C or Control C if you want to do the shortcut, right? We're just choosing copy. Now I need a way to select all those other interview clips. Well, here's the nice trick. I'm going to go up to the timeline menu. Remember we color coded those clips navy blue? Well, this is where this can come in really handy because down in the timeline menu, you're going to see select clips with clip color, and we can choose navy. I'm in the timeline menu, select clips with clip color. It's about a third of the way down. And we chose navy, or if you didn't choose navy, hopefully you remember the color you chose and pick it from that list. When you do that, the navy colored clips, which happen to be our interview, are all selected in the bin, or in the timeline, sorry. So now what we're going to do is go back up to the edit menu, and you're going to see something called paste attributes. Back in the edit menu, it's not just a simple paste, it's paste attributes. So we copied the attributes by just Command C. Then we selected all of the navy clips, which happen to be our interview. And we're going to go back up to the edit menu and choose paste attributes. When you do that, up comes a window saying, okay, what are the attributes you want to paste? You don't have to paste them all, right? You may have done a rotation or a crop or a stabilization or a speed change, and maybe you just want position to be pasted. So we're going to come over into that window, paste attributes, and click on the position checkbox, right? Because we just changed the position. So just in the video attributes, you'll see position, click the little checkbox, and then come down to the bottom and click apply. And you've just pasted that adjustment onto all of your interview clips. Swanky, I would say. That is swanky. Okay. Enough tomfoolery. Let's move on. We're going to go to back to our excellent O3 Bay Area Lights clip. Go back to the O3 Bay Area Lights clip and Shift Z to zoom into it. Or if you want to zoom into it on your own, now you know how, using the magnifying glass or the Command plus, Control plus. But zoom into it enough so that you can see maybe it fills half of the timeline. We want a decent amount of room down there. What we're going to do is, this is kind of one of the last shots in this timeline. Instead of having it be static, here, I'll play it up here for you so you can look at it. I'm going to play it here. It's kind of just sitting there. What I would like to do, it's near the end of our program. I would like to have it start in a little bit tighter and then slowly zoom out as the shot progresses. So I need to zoom into it a little bit at the start of this clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my playhead to the very beginning of the clip. And I'm going to make sure I select the O3 Bay Area Lights clip in the timeline. Just click on it to select it. The inspector has controls for this, but you might want to do this in the viewer with on-screen controls, right? If I want to resize something, I might want to do that in the viewer. I could go up and use numbers in the inspector, but I want to do this in the viewer. So in order to get controls where you can move things around in the viewer or scale them or rotate them, you have to turn on the on-screen controls. And how do you do that? Well, in the lower left-hand corner of your viewer, so go in the lower left-hand corner of your viewer, you'll see this little rectangle. And I'm just going to click on that rectangle. It's a button to display the on-screen transform controls. Transforms meaning scale, position, rotation. You can see you have handles in the corners there, right? These little white handles. If I want to scale that up, I'm just going to grab one of the corner handles and just drag it out. And you're scaling the image up. You can look in the inspector and see the zoom X and Y values changing, right? I'm gonna scale mine up to be about 1.2 in the inspector. Not too much. I don't want it to be like a crazy zoom out, just a nice subtle zoom out. So all I did was turn on that on-screen control. Then I get this outline. I'm grabbing one of the corner handles and scaling it up. You could do the same thing by going into the inspector if you want to refine it. Maybe you could go into the zoom X or Y, they're linked together. So you could just hover over one and do it there as well. It's up to you wherever you feel more comfortable doing it. But scale it up a little bit. Doesn't have to be the same as mine, just scale it up a little bit. Near the end somewhere of this clip, we want it to go back to its normal value. So what we need to do is say at this point in time on this clip, it should be at this zoom value. So how do we do that? We set keyframes to do that for this particular starting point, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to come into our inspector, and on the far right-hand side of our inspector, across from the zoom X and Y, you're going to see this little gray diamond icon. That is your keyframe button. I'm going to click on that keyframe button to turn it red. Once you turn keyframing on, you've now added a keyframe on this particular clip at this particular time for the zoom value, right? Why for the zoom value? That's what the one we're across from. That's where the red diamond is. When the diamond is red, it means you have a keyframe there. So now I want to zoom it down a little bit further into the clip. So let's move our playhead about, a third of the way from the end of the clip. Not all the way at the end, but maybe just a third of the way. I want it to stop around here and pause for a second before it cuts to the next shot. I want this to be back down to the zoom value, the default value, right? Which is 1.0 in the zoom. This zoom factor is like a magnifier. 1.2 is 1.2 times the size. So I just want the zoom to be 1.0 again. So what you can do is just come into zoom X and Y and type in 1.0, or you can use the slider to get there. Or the other way is you can just double click on the name zoom. If you come over to the zoom name in your inspector and just double click, it's going to reset that property to its default value. It's a nice little trick to get, instead of trying to wiggle it down to 1.0, just double click the name. Notice that there is now a red diamond at that point in time, right? You've added a second keyframe. The first keyframe's around 1.2, the second one's at its default value of 1. The diamond says there is a keyframe on this frame, right? So I'm going to move back to the very beginning of this clip. Move your playhead back to the beginning of the clip and play it to watch this zoom back, and then it stops.
It was really important.
Did you get a good zoom back? Hopefully you saw it zoom back. It's a beautiful robotic zoom. Everyone loves a very stiff robotic linear zoom. But if you're not the type who likes that style and you want a more ease in, ease out to this, there's a very simple way to do it. Now you have to do it for each keyframe. So you have to make sure you're on a keyframe. So the first thing is you look in the inspector. In the inspector on the parameter that you keyframed, you'll probably see a gray diamond with an arrow pointing either left to the right or both. The gray diamond says there's no keyframe on this frame, but the arrow is telling you that there is a keyframe on this parameter. And if it's pointing to the left, this little arrow, it means the keyframe is back. You've gone past it. So I'm going to click on that little arrow and it's going to jump to the previous keyframe. And your diamond should turn red when you do that, right? Everyone get that? You'll see a little arrow there. Either it's pointing left or right. Click on the one. I'm clicking on the one that goes to the left. But you see where I am on my timeline. I'm towards the end. I'm on that second keyframe we added. To set an ease in, ease out, I'm just going to come up to that diamond and right click over it. And you can see you get a menu that says linear or ease in. And I'm going to choose ease in on this. I want to do that for the first keyframe. So you can see you can click on that go to previous keyframe button again. And I'm going to right click and choose ease out. Same thing, you just do it for each keyframe. So you have those red diamonds, that says you're on a keyframe. You have those arrows next to the zoom diamond, right? And that's telling you that those are the go to next and go to previous keyframe buttons. You can see the other parameters don't have those, which tell you that there are no keyframes set on those other parameters. Only parameters that have keyframes will have those arrows. If you back up to the beginning and you play this, now we have a nice smooth landing as it comes to a stop, right? Much better. We're not going to do much with this, but I do want to show you that it's in there. If you come down to the clip in the timeline, the Bay Area clip, you'll see a little diamond icon on the far right lower corner of that Bay Area clips in the timeline. You see that little diamond icon on the clip in the timeline? That is a keyframe track button. If you want to click on that, you'll see the keyframes. So if you wanted to shift them earlier or later in time, this is the area you would come to do it. We're not going to do that. I just want to show you where it is. If you're interested in that, you'll be able to take the advanced editing class. They go into much more detail in that. So we're just using that button to reveal the keyframes in time, and you can drag them around there if you wanted to have it come to a stop later or earlier. If you clicked on that button, go ahead and click on it again to hide our keyframe track. All right. I'm going to Shift Z to see my entire timeline. And I'm going to move my playhead back to the beginning of the 05 Aerial Alaska. It's the only clip on video track 2. Move your playhead to the start of that track, or that clip. You can look up here. I want to get rid of the outline that we had for the on-screen controls, right? You probably still have that outline in the viewer. To turn it off, you just come back to that same button that you turned it on with, and you just click it again, and it will hide the on-screen controls. Look up here in Zoom, and I'm going to play this for you before we do anything. This Aerial Alaska clip is very pretty, but it's very, very slow, right? And I'd like to speed it up a little bit, make it go faster, see more of this beautiful Alaska scenery. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to select the Aerial Alaska clip in the timeline. So go ahead, the only clip on video track 2, just select it. In the inspector, you have all these video controls where we had zoom and position, but if you scroll down, you'll also see speed change towards the bottom there in the inspector. You can see this is just the name speed change. The controls are actually collapsed. If you click once on the name speed change, it will open up the controls. So I just click on the name speed change and it reveals all the controls in there. Now you have speed change controls for the selected clip. Maybe I'd like this to be twice as fast, 200% speed. So I might come into my speed percentage and type in 200 and then enter or return. Now my speed says 200%. And if I went back to my Aerial Alaska shot and played it, it is much faster. Right? It's pretty easy to make these speed changes right there in the inspector. But there are actually 2 different ways to make speed changes in Resolve. One is just using the inspector like we did. You just enter in a value and there it is. The clip in your timeline, notice, didn't change duration, right? The clip that we had, that Aerial Alaska clip, was something like 3 seconds. It is still 3 seconds long, but it's playing twice as fast. That's one way to make a speed change. I'm going to show you another way to make a speed change. And this one has a different sort of purpose. I'm going to play it. You can look up here in Resolve, and I'm going to play this with music so you can hear it. I'll try not to blow your ears out, so I'll lower the volume a little bit. The one thing I want you to notice in your timeline is on that music track on audio 2, there's a very little purple marker. We're going to get into markers in the next lesson, but notice that purple little marker that's down there on the music track. I'm going to play this for you, and so you can hear what that marker is indicating. If I play close to that and just listen. So that purple marker is that final drum beat, if you hear. I'll make it a little bit louder so you can hear it. Listen, it's that final drum beat that you'll hear. Right? But notice the visuals that go along with it. Our credits, I mean, that drum beat is where the credits should come on and the pictures should end, but our final credits come on much too soon. Watch this. Here we'll have our flying nighttime scene, and watch when the credits come on, and then also listen to where the drum beat hits. Right? The credits come way too soon. So instead of adding another clip or extending it by trimming, what I want to do is maybe retime one of these clips to extend it so that this final credits happens exactly when the purple marker is in the timeline, which is our drum hit. This is a different type of retime, right? The first retime we didn't change the duration of the clip. I need a retime function that does change the duration of a clip. So I'm going to move my playhead right over that purple marker. That's kind of acting as my target, if you will. Right? That's acting as my target. A good clip that I'd like to retime is maybe this 07 water taxi. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth clip from the end. It's right after the 02 A380. That's a good clip to retime. I might want to zoom into that clip a little bit. I still want to be able to see the purple marker, but I also want to be able to see this 07 water taxi, but just a little bit more detail. So zoom in just a little bit so until you can see both of them, the water taxi and where your playhead is over that purple marker. All right, so how do we get these other retime controls? Well, I'm going to come over to my water taxi, which is the clip I want to retime. I'm going to right click over it. And in the right click menu, you're going to see something called retime controls. It's right in the center of the menu. Just right clicking over the 07 water taxi. That's the clip we want to retime. And I'm going to choose retime controls. When you do that, a little speed change bar, notice the speed change bar is added right above the clip. Those are the retime controls. How does this work? Well, if I move my mouse pointer over the right edge of that speed bar, don't move it over the clip thumbnail because you'll be trimming it. Move your mouse pointer at the top over that speed change bar, you'll get a little resize cursor, right? This is going to allow you to drag the clip to extend its duration. Now, you're not going to be adding frames, you're going to be retiming it as you make it longer or shorter. I want to make it longer because I want the movie credits to end up where my playhead is under the purple marker. Now, if I start dragging that right now, and you can look up here, you don't have to do this part. I just want to show you up here in Zoom. If I start dragging this speed change bar, it's going to overwrite that next clip. I don't want that to happen. What I want to happen is like trimming, I'd like it to ripple or push down the rest of the clips. Well, this works just like trimming. If you're on the selection tool, it's going to overwrite. If you choose the trim tool, it's going to ripple the timeline as you retime this clip. So choose the trim tool. You can hit T on the keyboard if you want to get there. Come down to the clip in the timeline. Make sure you are on the right edge of that speed change bar. You'll get your resize cursor and start dragging to the right to push the clips down. And this time, instead of an actual percentage, I don't know what the speed I want is. I just know I want that movie credits to end up where my playhead or directly over the purple marker. So you keep dragging until you reach that point. Somewhere around 40% should be okay. So go ahead and retime that clip. Do you see how that's a different purpose than the first one? The first one, we were just like, the clip is too slow, we'd like to speed it up. This one, you're able to drag and push the timeline down or pull it back so that the timing of things maybe happen to a musical cue or for some other purpose, some sound effect or something like that. Both are useful, they're just two different ways of doing it. Once you have your clip, probably around 40-something%, you can play it to see it. And if I play all the way to the credits, we should see that it hits pretty close to the drum hit. So I'll play that for you. Another form of way to do your timing when you're trying to hit specific targets in your timeline. So that looked pretty good, although it didn't look pretty good. It looked good in terms of timing, but I don't know if you noticed, but when I was, and maybe you noticed on your system, maybe Zoom plays this a little stuttery anyway, but if you view that speed change on your system, I'm going to play it here. You can look at it on your system too. Play over that speed change you just did, the 07 water taxi. If I play it on my system, it's very, very stuttery, right? It stutters a lot. That's because the way Resolve does speed changes is it tries to do it as fast as possible by default. So it's going to just, if you have a clip and you're slowing it down by 50%, it's just going to double the frames, right? It's going to do it immediately. It's going to allow you to play it back very quickly, which is great, but that's not always the nicest looking result in here. So you can see as I play it here or you play it on your system, you get this kind of stutter, like freeze frames every other clip. I would like to smooth that out. Well, there are a couple of different ways you can do it, and those are located in the inspector. Before we move on, make sure that you're no longer on the trim tool. Use your selection tool, hit the A key, just so we don't accidentally trim something. Now go into your inspector and scroll all the way to the bottom. You'll see something called Retime and Scaling. And I want you to click on that name to reveal the controls in the Retime and Scaling section of your inspector. It's all the way down the bottom. This is where you can determine the quality setting of your retime. By default, it's going to try and do it super fast so you can play back in real time, which sometimes when you're working and you're trying to be creative, you don't want to wait for things to cache to your scratch disk. You just want to play instantly. So that's not a bad setting sometimes. But there are two other settings. Come over to your inspector where it says Retime Process and click this down arrow. You'll see three other settings. Nearest, which is the default we have. That's what it's doing right now, is nearest. Frame blend is going to try and blend the frames almost like a little cross dissolve between every single frame. So you can choose that and watch what happens when you do it. If you play it, it looks not too bad. A little soft, though. Look at the trees, particularly in the background. As you play it, you'll probably notice the trees don't look good. The plane looks okay, though. The final option, go back to your Retime Process menu, is optical flow. Optical flow takes the longest time to process. So the computer is going to have to do some work for it to process, but it's going to give you potentially the best results. I don't want to say absolutely the best results because it's not like a good, better, best. It's more like a good, better, best sometimes. Not all the time, because depending on how the clip was shot and the type of clip it is, optical flow either does a fantastic job or it does not a great job. And you get to know after using it for a while which one it does.
It's amazing with water, so you've picked a good sample clip.
Yeah, of course I picked a good sample clip. I want you to have a good experience with it. I will say that in your download in lesson 7, there's an example movie that shows you an example of when it doesn't work well and how to fix it. So I'm going to choose optical flow, but you won't be able to play it in real time. And the way you know that is a big red line will show up above the clip. See the big red line? As soon as you choose optical flow, a big red line will show up above the clip. That is the cache line. The cache line is saying, I have to process this, wait until the blue line, wait until the red line turns blue. When it's blue, then you can play it. So once it's blue, I'm going to back up and play it. And now things look incredibly smooth. Even those trees, they don't have that jitter in them, right? You get a really nice, smooth motion. If you have things like cars crossing, if you're looking across the street, or legs crossing, any kind of crossing things like that, a picket fence, optical flow isn't going to do well with that kind of stuff anytime things cross each other. But if you have kind of a shot like this where the background is staying pretty much the same, it's just kind of shifting a little bit, optical flow can do a great job. It doesn't take that long to cache. But you notice that you had that red line there, right? That's the caching line, and that's kind of there for you to know when things can't play back in real time. Resolve automatically goes and renders them to your scratch disk. Remember we set up the scratch disk yesterday? That's what that blue and red line is showing you. When it's red, it says, oh, I have to render this. I'm going to do it automatically for you. When it's blue, it's cached and you can play it back. So how do you turn that on or off? Maybe you don't want it to cache for some reason. Well, the control for that is located underneath the playback menu. Go up to your playback menu and you're going to see a render cache. It's about the fourth item down in the playback menu. And you should see that it's set to smart, right? The smart render cache is a way for Resolve to say, hey, I'll take care of it. When I see something that I can't play back, I will cache it for you. I will continually look up and down the timeline as you work. And for things that need to be cached, I'll take care of it. Don't you worry. And that's usually a pretty good way to work when you're an editor. If you're a colorist, you don't want things to be caching every time you tweak a little control. But as an editor, when you're making kind of retiming, some cross dissolves, sure, go ahead and you can cache when you see fit. So it's a great setting for editors in the smart cache. And that is the default when you're there. If you change the duration of this clip right now, if you change the speed, go ahead and make a subtle little change to this speed clip that we had. It doesn't really matter what you do. But if you make any little change, you'll see that the line turns red. And then slowly, if you leave your mouse or keyboard alone, it will turn blue. And that's the thing. The smart caching waits for you to pause, waits for a pause in your action. Either the mouse isn't moving and your keyboard isn't being touched for at least 5 seconds, and then it will kick in and start to cache. All right? There's actually settings for that. If you don't like the default settings, follow me with this. Go up to the File menu, come down about 2/3 of the way to where you had project settings. We used those at the opening of the previous lesson yesterday, or the first lesson yesterday. File, project settings. Go ahead and open that up. What it's going to come up to is on the left-hand side, you'll see master settings. That's where we want to be. You want to scroll down in that window until you see optimized media and render cache. These are where you can actually find the cache settings that you can work with. So scroll down in your master settings to the optimized media and render cache. What you're looking for is the very last menu in that row of menus. It says the render cache format. What's the render cache format? Well, the render cache format is, it is writing a file to disk, right? Resolve, when it caches, is writing a file to disk. What's the codec you want it to use when it writes to disk? Right? Do you want it to be a highly compressed file? If you don't have a lot of storage or you're on a laptop, you might want a very compressed file. It's not going to be good for output, but it's perfectly fine while you're working on a slow drive or a low-end system or a portable system. So you choose your render cache. The default is a very nice 10-bit file, either on Mac or Windows. Underneath that is a checkbox that says enable background caching after so many seconds. The default is 5. If you're impatient, you might want it to be 3. If you're like, don't wait at least 10 seconds, you might want it to be longer, right? Just depends on how you work. But this says when you leave the mouse and keyboard idle for at least 5 seconds, in this case, it will start to cache. So those two settings are where you can kind of customize the render cache. Otherwise, it just happens automatically as long as that smart cache is enabled in the playback menu. I'm going to cancel out of this window, so go ahead and click the cancel button. We're not going to make any changes there. That makes sense to everyone? Basically, if you never touch it, it's going to cache at a nice 10-bit quality after you leave your mouse or keyboard alone for 5 seconds. That's the default behavior. And you'll be able to see that by the red and blue lines in your timeline. All right. That's kind of the effects that we go into here on the edit page. What we're going to do now is we are going to go into a different lesson. This lesson is going to be lesson 8. I'm going to spend the next hour or so doing lesson 8. This is all about mixing audio. It's going to be a little bit about editing audio too. Editing audio and mixing it in the edit page. So that's what we're going to start now. Because we're starting a brand new lesson, we're going to use a brand new timeline. Still our favorite trailer, Age of Airplanes, but we're going to use a different cut of it, one that adds a few more, that we can add a few more tracks of audio to. So let's start by in Resolve. We're going to go to our project manager, right? Because that's what, sorry, not the project manager. We're going to go to our rough cuts bin because that's where we go when we want to import a new timeline, right? We want it to go in our rough cuts bin. So we're going to make sure our rough cuts bin is selected. We're going to go to the file menu. We're importing a timeline just like we did previously. File menu, import timeline. In the timeline, we're going to go to lesson 8. So it should show up back on lesson 7. You're going to back out of that, go to lesson 8. In there, you should see a timeline called, or a DRT file called chapter 8 audio.drt, DaVinci Resolve timeline. When you're on lesson 8, select it and choose open. Select that DRT file and choose open, just like we've been doing previously for our other timelines. What I'd like you to do right now, once you import that timeline, is what we've been doing is going up to the workspace menu and resetting our UI layout, right? Workspace, reset UI layout. We've done a lot of things. We've opened up an effects library, the inspector. Depending on your resolution, you might have one viewer. So resetting it will help all of us look at the same thing. Up above your timeline viewer, just to make sure we're all looking at the same timeline, you should see chapter 8 audio resolve, right? This is the timeline that should be above your timeline viewer. If you look in your timeline, it looks pretty much like we've been, the same timeline we've been using, and it really kind of is just cleaned up in case something went wrong when you were doing your effects. This is just a cleaned up timeline for us to work with. All right, one of the first things you might do when you kind of focus on audio in a project, right? We're gonna kind of reset our minds a little bit because we're gonna deal with audio. So the first thing you might wanna do is, you don't have to do this with me, I'll just show you up here. You might wanna just play the timeline without any audio whatsoever, right? You just turn off the audio and you play it to say, okay, right about now, what would I be hearing? What would I be hearing if this picture is on screen? And as you're doing that, you take notes. You make a list of all the places that you need to add specific sound effects. And you do it without audio because it kind of lets your mind go a little bit wild. You can do it with drugs, but I find that turning off the audio has less repercussions. So just turn off the audio and listen to it and say, what would I be hearing? And you keep a list. And that list is sometimes referred to as a spotting list. And traditionally it's done on paper, but we don't have to do that on paper. In Resolve, what we can do is add markers to specific clips to say at this clip, we want to hear this sound. So that's what we're going to do to begin with, is kind of make our spotting list. So let's take our playhead and move it into the middle of this 01 St. Martin clip. It's the second clip in your timeline, 01 St. Martin. You can see up here in Zoom, it's this plane flying overhead. I want to add a note that says, hey, we need a sound effect here. So what I'm going to do is first position my playhead over the clip. It doesn't have to be anywhere in particular, just as long as it's over the clip somewhere. I'm more or less in the middle of it. I'm going to select the clip in the timeline, just click on it so it's highlighted in the timeline. And then I'm going to come up into my toolbar, and you'll see these little blue icons in the toolbar. And the one on the right that looks like a little, I don't know what it looks like, chiclet, if you know what a chiclet is. This little chiclet is a blue marker. So that is your marker button. If you hover over it, it will show you markers, right? That's what it will say. And we're just going to click once on it to add the marker to the selected clip. It adds it to the frame that we're hovering over with our playhead. So it's right underneath the playhead on the selected clip. And you can see in the viewer, you have this overlay that's saying the name of the marker and the time code that it's at. You can customize this marker by opening up the marker dialog. To open up the marker dialog, go into your timeline over that blue marker that you've added and just double click on it right in the clip. Find that blue marker of the clip and just double click on it. It will open up your marker dialog. This is where you can give it a name, you can give it a color. So let's do that. I'm going to name it in the name area. I'm just going to name it SFX for sound effects, an abbreviation, just SFX. You can hit tab to go to the notes area. In the notes area, let's put a note like add roaring jet. Right? That's what we need there, is a roaring jet. And I'm going to make this a certain color. So let's come down to the bottom there and let's make this red. All of my sound effects are going to be red markers. Maybe if I start to do visual effects, they'll be yellow markers. And that way I can easily separate them and see them in the timeline. So all I did was name it SFX for sound effects. I added a note that says, hey, you need to add a roaring jet here. And then I made it red down the bottom by clicking on the red color. And now I can click done. And that sends the marker away. Now you can see in your viewer, you have the name and the note displayed when you're over the marker. Let's go to the next clip. Position your playhead over the Maldives clip, somewhere in the middle of it. I want to add a sound here. If you don't remember what this looks like, we didn't really use it that much. I'm going to play it for you up here in Zoom. It's just this overhead seaplane that flies overhead. So I'm going to make sure my playhead is over that Maldives clip, the 09 Maldives clip. It's just the next one over from St. Martin. I'm going to select it in the timeline. But instead of going up to the toolbar and clicking the blue button, I'm going to use the shortcut. The shortcut for a marker is M. M is in marker. So tap on the M key. It will add a marker. And instead of double clicking to open the marker dialog, I'm just going to hit M again. So tapping on the M key twice will not only add the marker at the current playhead position, but also open up the dialog. In this dialog, I'm going to name it SFX again. This note would be something like add overhead seaplane, right? We want them to add an overhead seaplane. So go ahead and add that into the notes, and I'll make it red. So the first way, we positioned our playhead over St. Martin's. We selected the clip and used the toolbar to add a blue marker. Double-clicking the marker opened up the dialog. We added a note and then saved it as a red marker. Then we went to the Maldives clip. Instead of using the toolbar, we just pressed M twice. The first M adds the marker. The second M opens up the dialog. We added SFX as the name and add overhead seaplane as the note. We made it red, and then you can click done. Let's make this third one, and our last marker we'll do very, very differently. I'm going to position the playhead on the beginning of that clip on video track 2, that 05 aerial Alaska shot. Move your playhead to the very beginning. Look up here in Zoom when you've done that. I just want to show you something. This plane is a prop plane, right? It's just a propeller plane flying along. I'm going to play this. So look up here in Zoom. If I play this, you see that it's a prop plane. And then the next shot is also a prop plane. So really the sound effects for these two clips could be very similar. So what I would like my marker to say is for these two clips, add a similar sound effect. So position your playhead at the beginning of that 05 Aerial Alaska clip. Move your mouse into an empty gray area of the timeline and click anywhere to make sure that nothing is selected. I'm just clicking in an empty gray area of the timeline to make sure nothing is selected in my timeline. My playhead is at the beginning of this Aerial Alaska clip. This is where I want my marker to start. I'm going to hit M. Notice where it adds the marker. When a clip is selected, the marker gets added to the clip. When nothing is selected, it gets added to the time ruler, right? And that's important to know because if I pick up and move a clip, the marker is going to go with it. But this marker that's in the time ruler is not on a specific clip. It's on a specific time. I'm going to hit M again to open up the dialog. This one I'm going to call SFX as the name again because it's a sound effect. And these are prop planes. So maybe add prop plane or propeller plane if you want to spell it out, but I'll just say prop plane. And then make sure you make it red. And click done. So now we have 3 markers, but this third marker is not meant to just show you, identify this beginning of this Aerial Alaska. What I wanted to do is have it cover the first clip and the next clip, the 10 Kenya clip. So how can we do that? Well, right now, if you've closed your dialog, hold down the Option key on your keyboard or the Alt key on Windows. Hold down that key, go over to your marker and drag it to the right until it expands and covers both clips. Option dragging or Alt dragging on a marker is going to allow you to make a duration marker. It spans it across the 2 clips. You can have it be any length. So now this marker covers multiple clips. Everyone good with that? Seems it. All right. One last marker we want to make. I'm going to move my playhead over to the very first clip in the timeline. And I'm going to select that clip in the timeline. So move your playhead over this first interview clip and select it in the timeline. This isn't going to be a sound effects marker. This one's more for visual effects. So what I would like to do is say, hey, you know, this light over here, this is very bright, this whole area. Can you dim this down? So I want to make sure they know the area that I'm talking about. I would like to draw on the screen, make an annotation on the viewer itself. So what I'm going to do is, remember that button you use to get the on-screen controls way down in the lower left-hand corner of your viewer, but instead of clicking on that rectangle, there's a little drop-down arrow to the right of it. In the lower left-hand corner of your timeline viewer, click that down arrow. It's going to give you a menu of on-screen controls for this particular viewer. And at the very bottom of this menu is annotations. So go ahead and choose annotations from the bottom of that menu. When you do that, you're going to get some drawing tools up the top there above your viewer. By default, it's just a regular drawing tool. So I'm just going to make like a little squiggly line from the top to the bottom of the screen over this lamp. And you can change the color and you can make arrows and things like that. But notice that as soon as you drew something on the screen, it actually added a marker. The two are tied together. Drawing on the screen automatically adds a marker to indicate there's a drawing on the screen. And you can add a note and you can do things like that. So if we wanted to add a note, we could do it the same way, opening up the marker. We don't need to do that. you know how to do that. But I just wanted to show you that the annotation tools allow you to draw on the screen very easily in case you need the more visual description of the area that you're talking about. To get rid of your annotation controls as soon as you're done drawing, you can just click on the little marker icon where you chose the menu. Right? Just click on that button again to hide those tools. All good? All right. We have 3 markers or 3 audio markers in our timeline. The last one we did was more for visuals. We're going to cast that aside as we continue working on audio. We have 3 red audio markers in our timeline. It's time for us to go and find some audio that we can use for sound effects. So to find that, I'm going to go over to my media pool and select my audio bin. In my audio bin, there are a bunch of audio clips. One of them is called sound effects. So go ahead in that audio bin, find the sound effects clip, and just double click on it to load it into the source viewer. So in our audio bin, you'll see a clip called sound effects. Go and double click on it, load it into the source viewer. We haven't really dealt with audio only clips in the source viewer before, so it looks a little bit different. At the very top of the source viewer, this is the entire audio waveform for the clip. That's what you're looking at up the top here. And you can drag that little playhead all across that clip to find the right spot. This is the entire clip up the top there. Down below, since this is a stereo clip, you have a left and right channel. So you have 2 waveforms. And this is a zoomed in portion of that audio waveform. It's just a zoomed in portion. As you drag, you'll see that it gives you more detail. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of this clip. Move your playhead all the way to the beginning. The red playhead in the viewer itself always stays in the center. So you're not going to ever drag that. It's just there as a visual guide to see exactly what the waveform is that you're over with the playhead. So this is great. We have our markers in our timeline that are showing us where we need sound effects. We have a sound effects clip in our source viewer. It would be great if we were able to add markers in the source viewer, and we can. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to add a few markers in our source viewer, very much the same way. The first one that we're going to add is on this very first sound effect, and I'll play it up here for you so you can listen to it. This is what it sounds like. Right? This sounds like a nice overhead plane, which could be very useful for us. So what I'm going to do is I am going to move my playhead over the very much the loudest part of this waveform. You see how the waveform has a peak on that first little sound effect? I'm going to move my playhead so it is over the very loudest point. And you can use your arrow keys, your left and right arrow keys, to nudge it 1 frame at a time so that your playhead is directly over the loudest point or the biggest part of that waveform. When you have that done, you're going to add a marker, same exact way, MM, right? MM. Because the source viewer is active, the marker gets added to the source viewer, and the second end opens up the dialog. We won't do too much writing here. Let's just use the name category. We'll call this name plain overhead. And once you've done that, you can click done. Right? So we have our first marker in our source viewer. Let's add a second one. I'm going to come down. This one's a little bit tricky. You might want to look up here. You can see at the beginning of my sound effect here, I've marked this sound effect, and then nothing happens for a little bit. Right? You can see nothing happens for a little bit, and then it picks up again. So let's just jump your mouse pointer, your playhead, to the beginning of the sound effect. And what you should hear, the next sound effect sounds like this. Right? It sounds like a little prop plane. So I'm going to go somewhere near the beginning. It doesn't have to be we don't have to be at the same point, but you can see it's a very long sound effect. So I'm going to choose to place it somewhere near the beginning of as that sound effect starts. And once you're there, just add a marker, M. And then hit M again to open up the dialog. This one is kind of a loud prop plane. So let's call this loud prop plane. But it's not that it's really not that particular frame. The first sound effect had a distinct peak, right, that we marked. This one kind of goes on for a while. So maybe we'd like to use our duration markers. I find option dragging in the source viewer a little bit tricky, just because it gets, if you have markers close to each other, it can be a little bit tricky. So you can see in your duration marker dialog, there is actually a duration field here, right? So you can click in there and just type in, if we want 5 seconds, 500, do 500 and then hit tab. And you should see that you have 5 seconds in that duration field. And once you've done that, you can click done. So now we have our second marker. Now let's look for one more. We need, kind of a loud jet plane. So if you look at your viewer up the top here, you can see there's nothing much going on after that sound effect. It's pretty quiet. You can look up here and zoom, you can see there's very quiet. And then all of a sudden, some sound happens, but we're looking for a loud jet sound. So right in the middle, you can see this big hump here. If you look up and zoom here for a second, you can see right in the middle, there's this large kind of hump. Well, that looks like a good promising jet sound. So move your playhead kind of right at the beginning of that sound effect. If you're going by time code, you can look in the upper right-hand corner of the viewer. I'm somewhere around 01, 0130. Somewhere around there is where you're going to find this effect. And I'll play it for you up here first. So that's the sound you're looking for. It's right in the middle, right around 01, 0130-ish. Use your arrow keys to get to the very beginning of that sound effect. This time, instead of adding a marker, what we're going to do is we're going to mark an in point at the start of that sound effect. I for in point. Then play it. And you guessed it, we're going to mark an O for out point at the end of that sound effect. So just mark an in and an out right around that sound effect. That's great. Now we have in and out. How do we make those into markers? Well, come down below the source viewer where that jog bar is, and you'll see your little mark in and out points there. Right click over those in and out points. It will give you a menu. And in that menu, you'll see convert in and out to duration marker. So where am I? I'm at the bottom of my source viewer where my little playhead, white playhead is in between my in and out points that I just set. I'm right clicking and choosing convert in and out to duration marker. So you can take those in and out points and convert them into markers. And we'll want to add a name to that. If you don't like double clicking, there's another way to get to the marker dialog. It's in that same right click menu. So go back up to your markers that are there, right click over them, And there you'll be able to see modify marker in the menu. Modify marker. You're just going back up to those markers that you just converted from the in and out point. You're right clicking over them and choosing modify marker from the menu. That opens up the dialog. It already has a duration in it. We just need to name it. So let's call this, we'll call this jet takeoff. That's what it sounds like to me. And once you've typed in a name, you can say done. So you can now look at your source viewer and you should see 3 marker areas in your source viewer. All right. We've added these markers, we've added the names. It's time to start editing in some sound effects. To do that, we might want to customize the look of our interface again, or maybe at least customize our timeline anyway. So let's figure out how to customize the timeline view, because we don't really need those big video track thumbnails anymore if we're dealing with audio primarily. And you can see in your timeline, Resolve gives a lot of attention to video tracks, but it gives very little room for additional audio tracks. So the first thing we might want to do is to push our timeline up to add more room down at the bottom for more audio tracks. So how do you do that? Well, if you look in between your audio and video tracks, you'll see a very thick line there, a divider between your audio and video tracks in the timeline. You can also go over to the timeline header and see it right there too, right? In between below your video 1, above your audio 1, there's a divider. You can just click and drag that up. I'm going to drag that up so the video 1 track is at the very top. That should give me enough room down here for more audio tracks. Right? It's just that big divider line in between your video and audio in your timeline. You can just click and drag that up. How do we shrink our video tracks and maybe expand our audio tracks? Well, to do that, you go to the timeline view options. That's in the upper left area of your timeline. Upper left area of your timeline above the big timecode track, or the timecode number, sorry. You'll see a little button there. It looks like a timeline. If you hover over it, it says timeline view options. And that's the menu. You can click on it to get a display of the menu. What we're going to do is we're going to click on this middle row, the video view options. The video view options has 3 buttons. The default one that's selected is kind of this film strip view. It has the film strip in there, the thumbnails. I'm going to go all the way over to the right, and this is just a simple bars view. So click that 3rd button. It gets rid of the thumbnails, just makes things bars. Kind of a more traditional video editing system. I can come down to the bottom where it says video track height and just shrink the video track height. Now, if you go all the way to the left, you're going to lose your markers. So only go as far as you can until you can still see your markers. Don't go all the way shrinking the video tracks too far. You won't be able to see your markers. The audio track could be expanded a little bit. Expand your audio tracks enough, but leave room for a 3rd audio track, because we're going to add 1 more audio track. So you can expand that audio track height up, but do leave a little bit of room underneath audio track 2 for 1 more audio track. Now this might be a better view for our audio editing. So you can close up your timeline view options just by clicking on that timeline view options button again. All we did was get rid of the thumbnails, shrink down the video track a little bit, and increase the audio tracks a little bit. And then to close that menu, you can either click off it or click on the button again. All right. So that first audio track that we see in our timeline, that is his voice, right? Those blue audio on audio track 1, all that is his voice. Audio track 2 is the music track. So we don't have any place to add sound effects. We need to add a new audio track. So the way you add audio tracks is I'm going to come over to audio track 1 and just right click over it. If you haven't noticed by now, you should have, but if you haven't, Resolve has a lot of functionality in the right click menu, right? Whenever you're in doubt of where is that located again, it's probably in a right click menu. So we're right clicking over audio track 1. You're going to see add track. And in that sub menu, you can choose, do you want to add a mono track, a stereo track, surround sound? We're going to add a stereo track. So choose add track, stereo track. And choose stereo from the list. That will add an audio track 3 to our timeline. And you can see the little number over to the right of the audio tracks, 2.0. That 2.0 implies that it is a stereo track. If it said 1.0, it would be mono. If it said 5.1, it would be surround 5.1. If it said 7.1, it would be 7.1 surround. So that little 2.0 that we have is telling us that's a stereo track. All right, now we have our track. How do we make sure that our sound effects that are in our source viewer get patched so that they're edited onto audio track 3? Right now, any audio that's edited will get edited onto audio track 1. How do I know that? Look over here in your timeline header. You'll see A1 and then audio 1. A1 is from your source. Audio 1 is the timeline track, and these two are across from each other. So it's telling you A1 will go to audio 1. Don't be confused that there's an audio 2 or an A2 and an A3. This doesn't mean that there actually is A2 and A3 on your source clip. Only the one that's highlighted is the one that's actually on your source clip. This source clip has A1, right? You don't see any V's highlighted, so there is no video with this clip. Just A1, and you can tell because it's outlined in red. So how do I make sure this A1 is going to be edited onto this audio 3? Well, the easiest way to do it is you just drag A1 down across from A3. I'm just dragging it down. You can look up here and zoom and see what I'm doing. I'm just dragging it down. And now you can see it's across. A1 is patched to audio 3 timeline track. Any edits I make from the source viewer will be edited onto audio track 3 in the timeline. All right, let's start editing in our sound effects. The first thing I'm going to do is I need a way to navigate to these sound effects. So in this timeline, it's pretty easy because I can easily see these markers in my timeline. But when my timeline gets bigger, it's going to be much harder for me to see these markers. So I need another way rather than just viewing the markers in the timeline. I need a list that will help me. In the edit page, that list is called the edit index. In the upper left-hand corner next to your effects library button, you'll see an edit index button. I want you to click on that edit index button. It will open up the edit index below your media pool. The edit index is just a long list of all the edits in your timeline. It's every edit, video and audio that's in your timeline. But we don't want to see all these edits. What we want to narrow it down to is just the markers. So in your edit index in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see that little 3-dot option menu again. Remember we had this above the source viewer and I said, this is an options menu. It is the options. It has the options for the panel that it's at the top of. So in this case, this 3-dot options menu is for the edit index. So click on that options menu and it gives you a list of all the things that you can show and hide. And one of them allows you to show markers. And we want to only show the red markers. So from that options menu, choose show markers and then choose red from that list, if red is indeed the color you made your markers. Hopefully it is. And what you should see is a much smaller edit index with only 3 items in it, because you only have 3 red markers. All right, just like a bin, this is giving me a lot of metadata that I can see here that I don't necessarily need to see. So just like a bin, you can decide what metadata you want to see. Do you remember how we did that in the bin? We went to the headers at the very top of the bin. In this case, we can go to the headers at the top of the index and right click over any one of them. Duration, record in, record out. Right click over any one of those and you'll have all the metadata that you can see in this edit index. And the only ones that we really care to see are number, color, and notes. Number is at the very top. Color and notes are towards the bottom. So everything else in between, real, V, C, these are all things you can turn off. We only want the top one, which is the number sign, the pound sign. And then as you get to the bottom, we want to keep color and notes. You can turn off marker keywords as well. So you just end up with 3 check boxes. The very top, the pound sign, number sign, and then towards the bottom, color and notes. And you can see in your index now you have numbers, colors, and the notes that you entered. And this now is going to allow us to find these markers much easier than just looking in the timeline. Everyone with me on that? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this one called Add Roaring Jet. It's probably the first one in your list. How do I use this edit index? Well, if I just click once on Add Roaring Jet, it will jump to the Add Roaring Jet marker. So it makes it very easy to find these markers in a very dense timeline. You just click on the edit index for the marker that you want to go to. Now our playhead is over that shot. We need to go and find our sound effect for that shot. There is no edit index per se for the media pool, but what you do have is something equally nice, I will say. If you go to the very top of the media pool, you have your thumbnail button. Do you remember that from yesterday, the thumbnail view? You also have a list view. Click on the list view button at the top of your media pool. At the top of the media pool, you are now in list view, pressing the list view button, and you can see your sound effects clip in list view, and it has a little disclosure arrow to the left of it. Click that little disclosure arrow. This will reveal all of the markers that you've added to this clip. And in fact, not only that, but if you have duration markers, it will only list that little clip with a duration. So they act as sort of sub-clips. So if I wanted to add this loud prop plane, this jet takeoff, right? The jet takeoff is the one we want under St. Martin. If I wanted to add this jet takeoff, if all I have to do is really, let's do it the easy way first. We'll do it super easy. I'm going to just drag the jet takeoff down onto audio track 3 and align it underneath my St. Martin's clip. Right? I'm just dragging and dropping. And if I went and played it, this is what you'd hear.
It's possible to shoot it.
Right? Simple little sound effect there. Let's do the next one in our list. The next one in our list, come down to your edit index and click on overhead seaplane. That's the next one in my list. So that's the one I want to do. You don't have to drag and drop, right? You can certainly do this with typical editing. So let's do that. We'll do a standard style editing. This is a really great feature that really is good for editing sound effects. So the first thing we're doing is clicking on that overhead seaplane. That's going to move our playhead to this Maldives shot. I'm going to zoom in the timeline in my Maldives. You can just Command +2 times or Control +2 times just to get a little bit zoomed in on the Maldives shot. I'm going to move my playhead on the Maldives shot to where I think the sound effect, if I'm the camera person in this frame, where would the sound be the loudest? I'm moving my playhead to that point where the sound would be the loudest. In my mind, the sound would be the loudest when I can just see the tips of the plane coming into the frame. So I'm just moving my playhead, and that's where the frame is, where I think the sound would be the loudest. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my source viewer. How do we activate the source viewer? You remember Q was the key. You can also just click in the source viewer. In the source viewer, your playhead is probably in the middle someplace. If you go into your bin, you can just double click on the plane overhead. Just double click on that marker in the bin and it will jump to the marker, just like the edit index. With the edit index, you click once. In the bin, you have to click twice and it moves your playhead directly over that marker. If you recall, in your source viewer, you have an in and an out mark from setting that duration marker. Well, we don't need those anymore. We don't want to accidentally use those as we edit this clip in because we want a different portion. So you're going to need to clear those marks. You can do that by going up to the mark menu and seeing clear in and out. It's Option X or Alt X is the keyboard shortcut. You can do that pretty easily. Alt or Option X to clear the marks in the source viewer. All right, the playhead, right, for our marker, look where the playhead is for our sound effect. It is over the loudest point. It's over the loudest point here for this sound effect, right? The frame in the timeline is over the loudest point. If I were the camera person, it is where the sound would be the loudest. So the playheads are actually in the right spot. They should line up. We would like to make an edit where we say, hey, take the playhead from the source viewer and line it up right underneath the playhead from the timeline viewer. I don't care where you start. Well, in this case, I kind of do, but I don't know where the start or end of this sound effect should be. I just know the loudest peak of it should end up underneath the playhead in the timeline. So what I'm going to do is say the duration for this effect in the timeline should be as long as the Maldives clip. I'm going to mark an in and an out right around the Maldives clip. Instead of moving your playhead, you can just say mark clip. Under the mark menu, mark clip. You can also just tap on X, right? If you tap on X, it's going to give you an in and an out right around the Maldives clip. So that's the duration of the sound effect that we want to edit in. I don't care where we start or end in the sound effect in the source viewer. It doesn't matter where the in and out are in the sound effect. I just know where this playhead should line up is directly over the playhead here in the timeline. I'm going to make sure my patching is correct. A1, drag it down onto A3. Patched correctly, one track to the other, right? And now I'm ready for my edit. The last edit in the toolbar we haven't used is called the Replace Edit. It's the third button. Remember we did Insert, Overwrite, and Replace? We're going to use the Replace Edit right now. What the Replace Edit does is exactly what we need. It looks at the playheads and lines them up. So this playhead position will end up right at this playhead position. And then it will figure out the in and out from the marks there. So go ahead and press replace edit. And if I play this, you can see even in the timeline, you can see the loudest part of this waveform is where my playhead is, which happens to be the loudest part of this clip. That's great for sound effects, closing of doors, footsteps, all that kind of stuff where you don't really care where the sound effect begins or ends, but it's critical in the middle that it lines up correctly. That's what a replace edit is good for. If I play this right now for you, this is what it sounds like. I'll mute the music so you can hear it better. Right? Lines up perfectly. The last one we're going to do is add prop plane. So go into your edit index, click once on the last one that we had. You might want to shift Z to see your entire timeline. We'll do this last one the way we did the first one, just by dragging it. We're going to come over to our loud prop plane in our bin underneath our sound effects and just drag it right where the playhead, so the playhead lines up, right onto audio 3. Everyone get that? So now we have our sound effects, right? We have our sound effects in place. Our program is looking pretty good. You don't have to do this right now, but I'm going to play this for you and you'll hear what's going on.
Really important to go out and shoot in real world. It's possible to shoot everyone.
As you can see, things are coming in at the right spot, but the volume levels of each track are all over the place, right? Some sound effects are going to be super loud. His voice is going to be quiet. What we need to do is now set the volume levels for each clip. And what I'm going to do is, I think right now, before we jump into mixing, I'm going to take this time to take our break. We're going to take a 15-minute break right at this point. And when we come back, we're going to switch from editing sound effects to actually setting volume levels for sound effects. So let's take our 15-minute break now, and we'll come back and start mixing sound.
baptism. I'm confused and singing into my thighs. Oh, phantom love.
All flowers in time, then towards the sun. I know you say that there's no one for you, but here is one. All flowers in time, then towards the sun. I know you say that there's no one for you, but here is one. But here is one.
Towards the sun, I know you say there's no one for you, but here is one. All flowers in time, then towards the sun, I know you say there's no one for you, but here is one. But here is one.
Keep it going in me, wicked traveler, fading farther from me, with your face in my window glow. Where will you wait for me, sweet willow?
It's okay to be angry, but not to hurt me. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Darling, darling,
All right, everyone. Hope you had a good break. We're going to pick up again here. We're going to be talking about audio a little bit, and I want to make sure everyone's on the same page as we do that. So I'm going to go over some audio measurement basics. In order to gauge if your volume levels are too loud, too soft, a good balance, whatever, you need to know how to understand measuring audio, right? Measuring volume. So you do that using meters inside of Resolve and every other application that has audio. And these are often called RMS peak meters. And you'll be able to tell because, you know, there's usually a little line peak at the top of every meter as it reaches its peak at any given sound as it plays. And this meter is used to gauge, you know, relative volume. So the measurements and the numbers along the side here of the meter is what's called a decibel. And 0 dB isn't an actual measurement. It is no change in sound level, meaning you haven't done anything to change the incoming volume level. That's 0 dB. Minus 10 dB would be something like 10 dBs lower than when the sound came in. It's not an actual measurement as it is a relative measurement, right? Starting at 0. What's called dBFS, or decibels full scale, that is an absolute value. Those are the numbers that you see along the side of the meters there. 0 dBFS is the system maximum level. It's the maximum your system can output. Now that's also a relative value, right? Because my computer can output a certain amount and a theater can output another amount, but they're both 0. They're both the maximum system level, okay? Minus 10 dBFS is 10 below the system maximum level. So that's what these meters are. So whenever you're dealing with audio, 0 is the maximum you can go. Anything above 0, you start to get clipping or distortion. So all the measurement in sound is going to be a negative value below 0. So how does this help you with setting any kind of measurements? Well, you have to start by figuring out where sound should end up. You need a target. And typically your dialogue, you target somewhere around 12 dBFS as the peaks. 9, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around there, you want your dialogue peaks to end up. This isn't a hard and fast rule. This also might not even end up there, but it is the initial target that you probably should start with. And then you can finesse it from there. So when we start setting the levels in our project for dialogue, we're going to be going for somewhere around minus 10, 11, 12, somewhere like that. For sound effect peaks, that's going to be different. Are we talking about a fly buzzing in the background, or are we talking about cannons shooting off in our ears? So the volume of sound effects are going to be have a wide range, but you start with a target. Have your low sound effects end up around minus 30. Have your loud sound effects around minus 10. And the same thing goes for music, right? Is this the opening music, or is this background ambient music? So when we're dealing with our various levels, you start off by targeting these different levels, and then you can start going from there. And you do this to start with clip by clip. Every clip has to be looked at, and the meter has to be set. The level has to be set. You don't do it, I don't care how the music sounds with his voice initially. That comes later. Initially, you just want to make sure all of his voice that's on a given track is not wildly louder or softer when it switches between clips. You're looking for consistency on a given track. So let's start by going into Resolve. We're going to continue on with that same timeline that we have. Right? We're going to continue on with the same timeline. And when you usually start dealing with audio, you start by dealing with your primary audio track. What's the primary audio track in your program? You target that first. So in our program, it's his voice, so we want to target that. So I don't really care about audio 2 and audio 3. I only want to listen to audio 1 right now. To do that, you can come over to your tracks header in your timeline. And remember we had these solo and mute buttons? Well, on audio track 1, I'm going to click the solo button. Solo is only going to allow me to hear this one track, which is all of his voice, because that's what I'm focusing on. Now we need a way to see meters, right? We don't have any meters right now displayed in Resolve, so I want to see some meters. You can do that by going up to the upper right-hand corner and clicking on the mixer button right above your timeline viewer. I'm going to click on the mixer button above my timeline viewer. That's going to give me my meters. It's actually going to give me a mixer, which we won't use just yet, but it will give me my meters. All right, so let's do this the easy way first. all of the clips on audio track 1 are his voice. I know that they all should be, let's say they all should peak around -10. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to select all the audio clips on audio track 1. You can start off whatever's easiest for you, just select them all. I'm going to drag a selection rectangle around them to select all the clips, all the audio clips on audio track 1. That's all his voice. Once you have that selected, go ahead and right click over any one of them. Right click over any one of them, and in the middle of the menu, you'll see normalize audio levels. We're selecting all the clips on audio track 1. We're right clicking over any one of them and choosing normalize audio levels. That's going to bring up a dialog that's going to allow me to automatically set the peak level for every single clip without my having to go through and do that. So the first thing is the target level in this window. What's the target level? Right now it says -9. Let's say we want this to be -10. So go ahead and type in -10.0. Notice it says dBFS, right? That's an absolute value. So nothing will end up louder than -10 dBFS. Now, underneath that, you have two buttons, one that says relative and one that says independent. Relative, since we have a bunch of clips on audio track 1, a relative setting would say, all right, I'm going to go across these clips. I'm going to find the loudest point out of all of them, and I'm going to raise that loudest point to -10. Everything else will be raised relatively, right? Independent says I'm going to go to every single clip that is selected, find the loudest point in every single clip, and raise that to -10. If you have someone who's talking at a relatively same level all the time, maybe it was recorded in the same room, the same day, choosing, independent should be fine because it's not wildly different. So let's choose independent. Each clip will be adjusted. He's close to the same on every single clip, so he should be okay. So you're going to choose independent, and we're going to choose normalize. That has now gone in, and it's non-destructive, so it's just raising the volume, the gain level on each clip. And now we don't have to worry really too much about any clip being too loud or too soft. They are consistent across the board. This doesn't really mean you don't have to listen to these clips. Just because the setting is saying the peaks are at a certain level, to your ears, they may sound different. Even though technically they're correct, you do have to trust your ears and listen to these sounds and say, do they sound correct? So even though you've done that, you typically go through and you listen to them all to make sure one of them doesn't sound any noticeably louder than the other. So you'd go through and listen.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie.
So for my ears, that didn't make the movie part sounded louder than the first part. So I'm going to play those two clips. They're right in the center again. Play them on your headphones and listen to them and see if you can hear that the second half of that shot sounds louder.
If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie.
Right? Even though technically we said these shouldn't be any louder than -10, the peaks, still, sometimes this happens where it just perceptively sounds a little bit louder. So how do you make adjustments on clips after the fact? Well, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you select the right one. So we don't need them all selected right now. I'm going to click in an empty gray area of the timeline. Click in an empty gray area to deselect the clips. You can move your playhead over that second clip. If you need to zoom in to see it, it's the second clip under, the second audio clip under Ariel, Alaska. And I'm going to select it in the timeline. At this point, you can go up to the inspector, right? All the controls are in the inspector. So with that audio selected, I can go into the inspector and here's my volume level. It's a clipped volume level. If I want to lower it, I'm just going to drag the slider down. Let's drag it down to maybe like 0, somewhere around 0.
Right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie.
Hey, Diego, sorry, Dion, I can't seem to hear you. Hey, Dion, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? This is Arthur, and just not hear Dion.
Yes, we don't hear Dion, but we hear you.
Hey guys, we're just going to troubleshoot this for a second, so don't worry. We are going to circle back on this lesson. It's going to take us a few minutes to figure out what's going on. So don't worry, okay? Oh, I think you're back.
Am I back?
You're back.
Yes.
I don't mind troubleshooting Resolve, but I hate troubleshooting Zoom. I have to say, it's not anywhere nearly as intuitive. That was called noise reduction. That's what that was a lesson in. And frustration. So sorry about that. We're going to continue on now that you can hear me. I have no idea where we left off, but I am going to repeat what I just did. And that was, I talked about repeating this last sound effect down here. So you have a final sound effect down here on audio track 3, and I just wanted to repeat it underneath the 07 water taxi, which is just 3 shots down from where we are. So I'm going to hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on Windows and just drag the clip over. Option dragging a clip or Alt dragging a clip will duplicate it as you drag it out. So I'm just dragging another copy of it off to the 07 water taxi. And that's what I was talking about as Resolve shut me up. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to start working on levels for our sound effects. Now, levels don't have to be done in the inspector. You don't have to go into the inspector to do it. You can do it right here in the timeline itself. We're going to deal with this first sound effect. And since we're going to be dealing with the sound effects, I no longer want to solo my audio 1. I'm going to turn off the solo on audio 1, and I'm going to come down to audio 3 and solo that. So turn on solo for audio 3, a little S button under audio 3, so you can hear just the sound effects. Now, the first thing before you would start adjusting anything is you kind of have to play it. So it would be helpful if we played these sound effects, at least the first one, to figure out. Remember we said sound effects probably that are in the background should end up between -30 and maybe -20 or -10, depending on how loud they should be. So let's say that this first sound effect should be somewhere between -30 and -20 when we play it. So as I play this sound effect and you play it on your system, look over to the right underneath that main meter there, that main 1 meter, and see if the sound effect falls between -30 and -20. So mine, as it plays, and you'll probably end up with the same thing, is kind of bouncing a little bit above -15. So I know I want to come down quite a bit when I do this. So how do we do this? We could go to the inspector, but instead we'll do it right in the timeline. So on this timeline, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the first clip. And if you look very closely, there's a thin white line going through the clip. Do you see that thin white line? If you hover your mouse over it, the mouse turns to an up and down arrow. That's how you know you're over the volume line. Your mouse changes to an up and down arrow. That means you can drag that volume line down to lower the volume. So I'm going to drag this one down, and as soon as you start dragging, you'll get a little tooltip. I'm going to drag it down to maybe to where it says like -15 to -20, somewhere in there. Drag it down that little until the tooltip says -15 or -30. -20, and then go back and play it and see if that worked for you. For me, -20 was a little too low, so I'll have to go back and I'll have to raise that line a little bit more, maybe just 5 dB or so, between -10 and -15 maybe. And then you play it again. And that second time worked for me. So go ahead and take 2 or 3 shots at refining that volume line so that the meter goes between -30 and -20 as you play that first clip. This isn't, right? We're going to have music over this. We don't want this to be the loudest sound. We want to hear it, but we don't want it to be the loudest sound. So we'll target somewhere in there. When you're done with that, go on to the second one and see if you can get that to fall between -30 and -20 and -30. My first play is very loud, I know that, so I'm gonna have to bring it down quite a bit. That's close. I'm gonna get a little bit more. And this is what it takes as you go through clip by clip and you start adjusting them so that all the effects or all the dialogue or all the music on a single track is consistent. Typically, what you would do is you would separate out your sound effects, right? So all the loud jet planes would be on audio 3 and all the prop planes would be on audio 4 and so on and so forth. Same thing with dialogue. You try and have one actor on audio 1 and the second actor on audio 2. And you try and keep it consistent. And that way, when you actually do real audio mixing, it's easier to set the volume levels across all a track. And when you get into EQ, you only have to set them on a track because it's the same person on every track, or one track has one person. So you're not EQing differently between clips. Hopefully that makes sense. Before you go on to the third one, the third sound effect, just play the first two and make sure that you have that between -30 and -20. And then play the third one and see where that ends up. This is no different, right? Doing the volume line is no different than going into the inspector. If you're more comfortable in the inspector, select that third sound effect and use the slider in the inspector to set that between -30 and -20. The benefit of the inspector is you can adjust it as the clip plays. So it's a little bit easier to do because the clip can play and you can make the adjustment using the inspector. Mine's going to be about -1, I think. And that should get me a good volume on that third effect. Sounds pretty good. Everyone get that? Third effect is third sound effect is in a good volume level. Before you go to the fourth one, here's an easy technique. The fourth sound effect is the same identical clip, right? We just copied it. We made a copy. So I'm going to select that third clip that we just adjusted. Go up to the edit menu and choose copy. Then come over to that last sound effect that you copied out. Go back up to the edit menu and choose paste attributes. Just like we did the paste attributes for the video, you can do paste attributes for audio as well. Right? And since the sound effect from the third clip is the same sound effect on the fourth clip, makes sense that we could just paste the audio level adjustment and we'll be done. So select the third clip, choose copy, select the fourth clip, choose paste attributes. In the paste attributes window, down the bottom, you'll see audio volume. And just choose audio volume, and then you can click apply to apply that to the fourth sound effect clip. All right, so you have paste attributes for video clips, and you have paste attributes for audio clips. And you have 2 ways to adjust the volume. Well, 3 ways if you count the normalize audio command. You can either adjust them in the inspector or on the volume line. One of the things about the volume line is that you can change the volume of a clip over time. Let's deal with the music clip. The music clip shouldn't have a consistent level throughout this whole piece. When he's talking, we probably want it to be a little bit quieter. And when he's not talking, we think we can raise the level up a little bit, right? So let's first deal with the audio and set the low level for when he is speaking. How quiet should the music be? I'm going to say the music should be around -30 when he's speaking. So position your playhead somewhere in the middle of the timeline or in the first, half of the timeline somewhere. Don't position it at the end because you want to play it. We're going to make sure that we're not listening to the sound effects only. So we're going to want to turn off the solo for audio 3 and turn on the solo for audio 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and play this music track, looking at my meters and trying to adjust it, however you want to adjust it, the volume line or the inspector, to get it so that it's right around -30. I think somewhere around -20 in the inspector is going to give me a good level. Probably a little bit lower than that, even -20, -25, somewhere in there. Remember, we're setting the volume level for the volume it should be when he's speaking. And it should be, pretty low. We want him to stand out. We don't want the music to stand out. So try and get it as close to -30 without going really below it. That would be too low. For me, it ended up being somewhere between -20 and -30 in the inspector. All right, if you have that, now we want to set the volume level for when he's not speaking. So let's go to that first clip in the timeline, the first interview clip. And just position the playhead just before it ends. Just before that first interview clip in the timeline ends. I'm going to zoom into my timeline so you can see it better. You don't necessarily have to, but if you want to make it easier on yourself, you can zoom in a little bit on the timeline. I'm positioning my playhead kind of just before that last word. And just like keyframing, I'm going to add a keyframe or a control point on that volume line in the timeline, right underneath my playhead. Remember that white volume line? I'm going to add a control point or a keyframe at that point. And the way you do it is you position your mouse pointer over the line so you'll have an up and down arrow. And then Option or Alt, hold down the Option or Alt key and click. And that will add a control point on the volume line. This is the start of our ramp up. That's what that red control point or keyframe is indicating to us. That's going to be the start of our ramp up. So now what I'm going to do is, you don't have to move the playhead. You can do it without moving the playhead. Move your mouse pointer over the volume line, but maybe just at the point when his interview ends. So you can see here's where the interview ends, and I'm just moving down to the volume line right underneath that endpoint, and Option or Alt clicking again to add a second control point. Sometimes this is called rubber band audio adjustments. When you've done that, you can just click and drag up on that second control point to raise the volume level. You don't want to do it by too much. Just a little adjustment. And when you're done with that, play and see, because after that control point, you're going to have a new volume level. Before the first control point, you're at the level that you were at. The second control point is going to add a louder level, right? And you want that to be around -20. So see if that works out for you. Mine worked pretty well. So Option clicking on the volume line allows you to add additional control points and raise and lower the volume. I'm not going to ask you to go through the rest of the music and do that. If you want to do it after class or before class tomorrow, you can feel free, but I don't want you to have to do that. I am going to actually continue on with this lesson because we have one more piece that we want to do here. And that is the music, if we listen to it, just kind of cuts right in. I'll play it here for you so you can listen to it. Hear how it just starts, it just cuts right in. Well, I would like to fade that music in. Do you remember how you faded the video clip in? You can do the same thing with audio. I'm going to move my mouse pointer over that music clip. And with my mouse pointer over the music clip, you'll see these white handles, just like we did for video, but these are audio fade handles. So if I want to drag that first one in, I'll make a nice long 2-second fade in just by dragging that handle. Just like you did for video, this one's for audio. Then you can back up. And if you want, you can turn off your solo button and listen to the entire mix.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
Right? Very easy to add the fade in on music and on sound effects. Everyone with me on that? All right. For this next thing, what we're going to do is we are going to take what we just did and we are going to bring it into Fairlight. Fairlight is the audio workstation inside of DaVinci Resolve. So we've been doing audio as if we were video editors. Now we're going to look at audio from the standpoint of an audio editor, a sound mixer. And it works a little bit differently, but you'll see a lot of things are the same. And it also gives you a lot of power in a very simple interface. And sometimes, although I'm not a sound mixer, sometimes I'll just go into Fairlight because I think the interface gives me more room for more audio tracks. And it does, so it can help out even in simple ways. So let's start by going into Resolve, and just like we did in the other lessons when we started a new chapter, we imported a timeline. For those of you who are keeping track, this is going to be chapter 9 in the PDF. So remember, if you were lost on that last exercise of audio in the edit page, you can go back to chapter 8. If you get lost when we're doing this Fairlight stuff, you can go back to chapter 9 and review some of it. So let's first start by importing our timeline. Go up to your upper left-hand corner into your rough cuts bin. We're going to go to the same file menu, import timeline that we've been doing previously. File, import timeline. We're going to go to our R17 beginner guide folder. We're going to go to lesson 9. And in there, you'll see a timeline called chapter 9 fairlight.drt. Again, that's our DaVinci Resolve timeline file. So we're just going to choose to open that up for us. You'll have a new timeline that loads in. Now, this timeline is very similar to what we've been working on. However, we did add a few more tracks of sound effects just to make it more interesting to do some mixing on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the workspace menu and choose Reset UI Layout, just like we've been doing. It will bring us all back to a default setting here. Everyone's following along. What you should see over in the timeline viewer up above, it says chapter 9 Fairlight, right? Gives you a little bit, make sure that we're all on the same timeline. Now, if a lot of you do any sound mixing or work with a sound mixer. You send your projects from your editing system to your sound system. You know what it takes to do that. You have to flatten out your video tracks. You have to create or consolidate all your media onto a drive and create your AAF file. And then you bring that over into your mixing application, import it all in. Well, here inside of Resolve, because it's all in one application, to move from picture editing to sound editing, we're just going to come down to the bottom of the screen and click on the Fairlight button. It's the next to last button down at the bottom there. Just click on the Fairlight button. This is going to open up the Fairlight page. It's the same timeline that we've been looking at. There's no difference here. It's the same timeline, although it looks a little bit different. And that's mostly because you have tracks in your timeline, and it shows for each clip, it shows the number of channels. So all of our clips were stereo, so you can see the left channel and the right channel for every single clip. But let me review the interface just so you know what you're looking at. It's pretty easy. Across the top here are all meters. So if I just come over, you don't have to do this. If I come over and just start playing, you'll see that my meters start bouncing depending on which track is playing at any given time. Over on the far right, you have a built-in video viewer. If you have a Blackmagic card like a Deck Link or an Ultra Studio, you can get this video to play out on a large, television monitor. But you have a built-in viewer right here if you don't have that. You have your transport controls like play and stop. All the same things you knew in the edit page work here. Play, spacebar, stop, place bar. Using the J, K, and L keys all work here inside of Fairlight. Using the left and right arrow key will nudge you back and forth. So all that kind of navigation stuff works for you. You also have a toolbar here. You have your markers and a selection tool, right? You have a timeline view options button, just like you had in the edit page. And over here, you have a vertical and a horizontal zooming slider. So you have two zooming sliders to zoom in and out of tracks in the Fairlight page, where you just have one in the edit page. You also have a way to not use the zoom sliders. If you have a 3-button mouse, you can zoom into tracks by holding down the Option key and scrolling your middle mouse up and down. Option key or Alt key, scrolling the middle mouse will zoom it vertically, right? And it goes into the playhead. So wherever the playhead is, that's what it's going to zoom into. If you hold down Shift and you scroll your middle mouse, it's going to expand them vertically. So you can really get in and see a waveform. Now it's going to do it into the middle of the tracks, but you can zoom into a particular track. Go over to the timeline header and select audio track 1. Right in the timeline header over here in the timeline, just click on audio track 1, it will highlight. If you shift scroll your middle mouse, now instead of scrolling and zooming into the middle, it zooms onto the selected track. Makes it very easy to pick a track and then zoom into it. What I'd like you to do is shift scroll your middle mouse so you can see all 5 audio tracks in your timeline, and do a Shift Z to fit the entire timeline horizontally as well. Over on the right-hand side, you have a mixer. It's a more advanced mixer that's in the edit page. The thing about the edit page mixer and the mixer here on Fairlight is, and the reason we didn't use it when we were setting levels, are these are track-based mixers. Meaning if these faders, as we raise them up and down, adjust the entire track. That's why the first thing you do when you're mixing audio is you go through and set every clip on a given track to be consistent. That way, if we say, oh, his voice is a little bit too low, we don't have to go in and adjust every single clip because we did that initially to get consistency. Once we've done that, now if his voice is too low, we can use the mixer and say, oh, let's raise his voice. And all of his clips will be raised because the mixer is a track-based mixer on both the edit page and on the Fairlight page. All right, now that we kind of have an idea about the interface, we know how to move around. What we want to do is maybe we want to do some little housekeeping before we move on. When you start mixing audio and as a sound mixer, you generally don't leave your audio tracks labeled as audio 1, audio 2, audio 3, and so on, because that doesn't mean anything when you have 50 audio tracks, right? What was track 39 again? Yeah, you can't remember. So what you normally will do is you will go and you will name these tracks, and you can name them pretty easily. So come over to the audio 1 and double click on the word audio 1, and that will allow you to edit it. I'm going to call this my sync track, SYNC, just as it's, you could call it, you know, narration. I'm going to call it sync. It's my sync sound. I use all uppercase. It's sometimes easier to read than upper and lowercase. Hit the tab key and you'll go down to audio 2. So once you type in sync, hit tab, you'll go down to audio 2. I'll call this SFX01 because it's my first sound effects track, SFX01. Then press tab. Want to guess what this second audio track, sound effects track will be? Yes, SFX02. We have yet a third sound effects track, which is audio 4. Tab again, SFX03. And the last music track, the last track will be your music track. That's audio 5. Tab down to the last track and just call audio track, label it music. So now we have these tracks labeled. What else might be nice is if we grouped tracks together based on their sound and we color coded them to be the same. For instance, all of our music track can be this green color, but maybe we'd like these sound effects tracks to be a lime color. So let's come over to our sound effects 01. You can right click right on the name, sound effects 01, come down right in the middle, change track color to lime. And you can do the same thing for sound effects 02. Make them all the sound effects tracks will be lime. Go ahead down to sound effects 02, sound effects 03, and make them lime colored. And you try and keep this consistent so that as you build up more and more tracks, all of your dialogue tracks will be a certain color. All of your sound effects will be a certain color. All of your music, right? It helps you with organization. It helps you with parsing the tracks as you look at this big timeline with a bunch of clips on it. You can get very detailed with all the colors and color code the tracks to make it easier to find the area that you're looking for. And you start it early because you won't do it when you have 50 tracks. Start it when you have 4 tracks. When you get up to 50 or 100 tracks, you'll be glad you did. All right, so what happened with us is when we imported this timeline behind your back, the editor decided to make a spotting list for you and added a bunch of markers. You can see them at the top of the timeline there. And those are all things that they discovered that they need done to the soundtracks in here for us to do. So we need to look at our index. Remember in the edit page, you have an edit index. Well, here inside of Fairlight, you have an index up in the upper left-hand corner. Just click on that index button. The index here in Fairlight has 3 tabs at the top. The one that we're looking for is the markers tab. Just click on markers. You can go into a lot more detail in Fairlight in this index in the Fairlight class that's coming up. but we're just going to use the markers tab, much like we did in the edit page. The difference here is that the markers tab in the index for Fairlight actually shows us a thumbnail, and that can be helpful, although it might be more helpful if we could see the notes that they attach to each marker. So I'm going to come down where our list view is, where our thumbnail view and list view at the top of our index. I'm going to switch this to a list view. So go ahead and click list view. Over on the right-hand side here, at the top of our markers, we're interested in this name because this has all of our notes, but it's a little truncated, so you may need to expand the column just by dragging out that divider line at the top of the header for name. Just drag that little divider line until you can see the entire name of the note there. Now we have our spotting list, and we're able to go through and make the fixes that they point out here. So the first one, you can see here, the note is narration is in stereo. And in fact, if we look at the sync track, which is his narration, it does have two channels, left and right channel, right? You can see this. Let's zoom into it to see it a little bit clearer. Click on the heading for the sync track to highlight it. Hold down Shift and scroll your middle mouse. If you don't have a middle mouse, you can use the vertical slider here in the toolbar here. Does the same thing. It's just a little easier if you have a middle mouse. Expand the track to fill the entire timeline window. So our sync track, the two channels you see there, fill the timeline window. You can tell a lot without even playing this sound track here. You can tell a lot just by looking at the waveforms, right? Take this first clip here in the timeline. Look at the two waveforms. This is the left channel and the right channel. They look like they have an identical shape, right? There's a space here, there's a waveform here, and a space there, and it matches up. Not only do they match up shape-wise, size-wise, they are identical. One isn't larger than the other. If the shape and the size are the same on both channels, you can be pretty sure that they have the same recording in both ears. Certainly you can listen to them in headphones and hear that both channels are the same, but even just by looking at these waveforms, you can tell pretty clearly that all of the clips have the same sound on the left and right channel. Now remember our note. Our note was narration is in stereo, right? And typically you don't do people's voices, whether it's dialogue or narration, you don't do it in stereo, you do that in mono. Think of your surround sound setup, right? If you do it in stereo, the people's voices are going to come out of the left and right speakers and not in the center speaker. You want it to come out of the center. So you really want this done in mono. So how do we make each one of these clips mono without having to go back and re-edit all of these? Well, the cheap and easy way, because all of our clips are the same, they all have the same recording on left and right, we can just change the track to mono. So to do that, just right-click over your sync track header. Just right-click. Come down, in the middle of that menu, you'll see change track type to, right? We can change this track type to mono. So choose mono from that list. And all of a sudden you'll see there are no longer two channels, but one waveform, which means there's one channel. What it did was it said, okay, you're making this a mono track. I'm just going to take that left channel and make it mono center panned. So now if you listen to it over your headphones, it will sound like it's coming out of the center. Now, if you don't have the same sound on both channels, this trick doesn't work, right? But for us, this worked pretty well. And you can tell in your timeline, there's a new 1.0 there that says this is a mono track. Remember we talked about the 2.0 being stereo? Well, the 1.0 says mono. That's our first problem in our list. That's done. Let's go to the second one. Last word cuts off too early. That's in our index, the second one, O2. Last word cuts off early. Well, just like in our other index, we can just double click. You can double click on the thumbnail if that's easier for you. Double click on the thumbnail and you will update, excuse me, you will update to jump to that marker. We're just double clicking on the O2 thumbnail. And our playhead in the timeline jumps to what they're talking about. This last word is cut off. I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key on Windows, scroll my middle mouse to vertically expand this track a little bit, like halfway into the timeline. Again, if you don't have a middle mouse, use the toolbar horizontal slider so that waveform kind of fills half of the screen there. Gets us a nice detailed view that we're going to be working with. Looking at the waveform, it certainly looks like it's clipped. I'm going to come over and I'm going to solo this track so I can hear it without any of the sound effects, and I can see if it's really, I can listen and hear if it's really clipped. So let's play over this clip and hear if the last word is cut off. We don't hear sound. Now, this is a good lesson. If you don't hear sound, that's because way over on the far right, underneath your viewer, you're going to see this little speaker with an X over it. So if you don't hear sound when you play, if this little speaker icon has an X over it, that's the monitoring system inside of Resolve. If you just always, it has nothing to do with your timeline per se, it's just the monitoring system in Resolve. So if you want to turn off audio for a second, you can just click that speaker icon. If currently you don't hear audio, click on that speaker icon again, and you will now hear audio, and you'll be able to hear if this word is cut off. So I'm going to play it here and listen to it.
Shoot the real world.
Right? That sounded like it was cut off.
Shoot the real world.
You can listen to it on yours if you need to hear it clearer, but it sounds like the word world, shoot the real world, and the last word world is cut off a little bit. So we want to be able to trim this. So if we want to trim inside of Fairlight, what we can do is we can come down and just like in the edit page, move your cursor over the end of the clip and you'll get your little trim cursor. I'm just moving my mouse pointer over the end of the clip as if I'm going to trim it, just like the edit page, and you'll get your little trim cursor. Now you can click. And the nice thing about the Fairlight page is when you click, you can see that it's actually showing you on the right side the remaining waveform that's there. So I can see how much is actually clipped off at the end there. Right? On the right of my mouse, I can see a ghosted waveform. That's the clipped off sound. So I know exactly how much I have to trim. I'm just going to drag it out a little bit. And then let go. And then I'll play it back and it should sound like it's not cut off.
Shoot the real world.
Right? That's pretty good. I'm going to hold down my shift key. If you've trimmed that and it worked for you, I'm going to hold down my shift key and scroll my middle mouse so I can see all 5 tracks again. You might want to shift Z as well to get the timeline back in the window there. One thing I kind of forgot to mention that I'll just bring up now, it's not super critical, but it's nice to know. You are in Resolve, right? You not only can see the picture, but if you wanted to see the timeline video edits in the Fairlight page, you can do that as well. Come over to your toolbar above your timeline To the left of your magnification sliders, you'll see your timeline view options button. Click on your timeline view options button. The first button that you see there under timeline options is video tracks. You can click on this video tracks button to see the video edits. It's not that you're going to make video trims here, but it's really helpful when you're navigating. If they say go to such and such a clip, in most cases, when you're using other sound mixing stations, you just have a flattened video. You don't know where that edit is, so they're generally giving you time code numbers. Here, you know exactly where the cut is, where the middle is, where the end of it is, by looking at those video tracks. Really helpful. All right, we are now moving on to the third marker here. I'm going to click on the third marker. Right? Double click on the thumbnail, the playhead will jump to that position. The third marker here says add voiceover here. So we need to add voiceover at this point. Considering all the trouble I've had with audio, this is not a good idea for me, but we're going to move ahead and pray to the sound gods that we'll be fine. So they want us to add some voiceover. You can record voiceover directly into Fairlight. Fairlight is a very advanced multi-track recording system. So we can do a simple voiceover without any problem whatsoever. Now, if you don't have a microphone built into your computer, don't worry about it. You do not have to follow this step along. I will just show you it. But if you want to and you have a microphone built in, you are certainly welcome to record some audio. So we're going to do that right now. The first thing we are going to do is we want to be able to record audio, and it's going to be someone's voice. It's going to be a voiceover. That we don't have an existing track for that to go on. We don't want to mix it with our sync dialogue. It's not the same sound. It's not the same recording. So we need to add a track. But I want to keep all of my human voices up the top of my timeline. I don't want it to end up at the bottom, right? Because then I'll be scrolling up and down. I want to deal with all of my, remember, we're keeping all of our like sounds together. So all the dialogue and human voices will be at the top. Sound effects will be in the middle, and music will be at the end. So how do I insert a track? Adding a track is just going to add it to the bottom. I want to insert one. I'm going to come over to my sync track. I'm going to right click. Remember we had add track? Well, underneath that is add tracks. So I'm right clicking over my sync track, and I'm choosing the second item down, add tracks, dot, dot, dot. That little dot, dot, dot implies that there's going to be a dialog that opens. So when you choose it, a dialog opens up and it allows you to choose the number of tracks, where you're going to insert the tracks, and the type of track you're going to create. Well, we just want to create one track. We want it to end up below the sync track, and we want it to be mono, right? Because we're doing a voice, and voices are always done in mono. So we're going to choose mono here. Once you do that, choose add track. Now you've added an audio 2 track underneath sync, right above your sound effects 01. We're not going to leave this as audio 2. We're going to double click audio 2 and call it VO, voiceover, VO. So label that new audio 2 track voiceover, or VO. All right, so this is going to be the track for our voiceover recording. I'm going to take off that little solo button on your sync track. If you still have it on, turn that off. Just disable the solo button on the sync track. You can look up here in Zoom. You're not going to have to do this, but I want you to look up here in Zoom, because the first step, do not follow this first step. The first step is to quit out of Resolve, but don't quit out of Resolve. I'm just telling you that that's the first step. Because usually when you're hooking up a microphone or other devices into your computer, you want to make sure your application is closed. So the first thing you would normally do, but again, we're not doing it. The first thing you would want to do is quit out of Resolve. The second thing is you'd go up to your either your start menu in Windows or your Apple menu here on a Mac, and you'd go into your system preferences where your audio is, right? Your sound preferences, and you'd make sure that the microphone that you want to connect to is showing up and is getting volume into your computer, right? That's the first kind of step. And once you have that confirmed that you do see your microphone and you are getting a volume level, then you can launch Resolve back into your timeline. That's the first step. The next step is you want to make sure that your audio is going to a specific location, right? You may want to have a specific drive for all of your audio. So where is that going to go? Well, normally it will go to your scratch disk, but if you want it to go someplace else, you're going to go up to the File menu. You're going to go to Project Settings. So go to your File menu, Project Settings. On the left-hand side of your project settings, you'll see Capture and Playback. Select Capture and Playback from the sidebar list in your project settings. And down midway in that window, you'll see a Capture section. And you'll see a Save Clips To, and it's going to show you where that clips that you create are going to be saved to. Now, we're not going to change it. Wherever it's going is fine for this. We're not going to do that much. So just know that if you want to have your audio recordings going to a specific location, you want to make sure that your Save Clips To is targeting that location. Otherwise, it's just going to go to your scratch disk, which may be fine. It's up to you. All right, without changing anything, just cancel out of that window. Just wanted to show you where that is, so you weren't wondering where the file goes. All right, I want you to think about a physical setup. If you were connecting a microphone, right, you would connect the microphone into the mixer to make sure it's going to the right channel, right? The right channel strip. Over in your mixer, these are channel strips. We want to make sure ours is going to the VO channel. You can see the names down here in the middle of the track. It says sync in VO. I want to make sure that my microphone is patched to go into this A2 VO channel strip. So how do I do that? Well, at the very top of the channel strip for A2 or VO, whichever one you're looking at, that says no input. Well, you want to click on that no input underneath A2 and say input. Choose input from that menu. Choosing input from that menu is going to open up the patch window. This patch window is divided into two halves, the left half and the right half. The left half over here is showing you all of your microphones. Whatever microphones your computer sees, it shows you right here, right? It says audio inputs. These are your audio microphones that are connected. Over on the right side, this is the track area. And right now, since we already selected it from the menu, it says VO is already selected here. See how it's highlighted? Right? But it has all of your tracks. So this is where you could patch to a different track if you wanted to. Make sure that you select one of the microphones. If you have kind of stereo input, you can just select one of them. Just make sure one of their microphones is highlighted and make sure your VO track is still outlined there. And that's how you patch to make sure your microphone is going to the correct track. Once you do that, down in the lower right-hand corner, click Patch. And then you can close this window. In the upper left-hand corner is a button that you can, little X button to close the window after you click Patch down in the lower right. All right. All right, so now that we have our microphone connected and it's patched to go into the right track, normally what you would want to do is you'd want to test to make sure that the volume level is right and have someone listen to the music and maybe hear their sound, practice their line, things like that. So the way that you can do that and you can hear your voice in the headphones and see your voice on the meters is you have to arm the track. And you arm the track over here in the timeline header. See how there's an R there, right? We know what the S and M for, solo and mute. The R is for arming the track. And as soon as you do that, it's not going to record. This doesn't record anything. It just, think of it as making the electronic connection so that you'll be able to hear your voice in your headphones, and you'll be able to see your voice in the meters. You may also want to solo the same track, or else you'll start hearing all of the other music in tracks. And unless you're using headphones, it could record on your microphone. So depending on what you're doing, you may or may not want the solo on. If you have headphones, you don't really need the solo on. But if you don't have headphones, you'll probably want solo on. If I do this, I'll probably get feedback, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I won't let it last long. But you'll be able to see that the meters. So click the R when you're ready to test it. And now you should see meters coming up. You can see if I talk, it will get feedback. So I'll turn it off. But you need to arm the track to hear it, to hear your voice, to see your voice in the meters. And when you're ready, your playhead is already at the point where you're going to start recording. You've patched it to go to the right track. You've armed your timeline on the right track. So you're ready to record. The next thing is when you're ready to record, you're going to come up to your toolbar right above it, and there's a little dot there for record. There's no nice little, hey, get ready, 1, 2, 3. No. As soon as you click that button, it starts recording, right? So you're going to want to practice your line, and then when you're ready, hit the record button and record your line, and then press stop when you've recorded it. So what's the line that you're going to be recording? It is this. In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers once again. I want emotion. I want feeling. I want some gusto in this line, okay? So go ahead and record it, and I'll shut up for about 2 seconds. That's about as long as I can keep quiet. All right, you should have gotten it. In the age of airplanes, we have become explorers once again. You can record that over and over as many times as you want. Each one will be saved. It will be saved into the current bin that's selected as well. But it will be saved in your timeline. You can learn more about that in the Fairlight class. So when you're done, disarm your track, turn off that R, turn off your solo button as well. And that's how you record, and you record onto multiple tracks. But as nicely as you did, and you did do a great job, we found professional talent that we prefer. So we're going to use the professional talent. So if you want, select that clip that's in your timeline that you just recorded and delete it. Just remove it. You'll still get paid. We have professional recording. So how do we find our professional recording? Well, I'm going to go over to my media pool up in the upper left-hand corner. Just like in the edit page, just like in the media page, you have a media pool view inside of Fairlight. Let's go up and click on the media pool. You see your media pool right above your index now. Select the audio bin in the media pool. In the audio bin, you're going to see a clip called HFVO. HFVO. and select that HFVO clip. I'm not leaving. My dog just wanted to go out the door. So sorry, I didn't mean to turn my back on you. So select that HFVO clip. Over here, above that HFVO clip, you're going to see a little player, and it shows you the waveform for that clip. And without even playing this, we can look at this waveform and see, yeah, they look like they're the same recording, but the lower track, right? The lower channel, the right channel, is much louder than the top channel here, the left channel. If you actually play this in your headphones, you would probably hear that. I don't have headphones here, so I'm not going to play it, but you would definitely hear that your left channel or your left ear is very much a lower sound than your right, than the voice in your right ear. Just so you can see that right in the waveforms as well. So what we want to do is, since we're going to edit onto a mono track, if we edit right now, it's going to, by default, take this top left channel and edit this onto our mono track. We need the opposite. We just need to take this right channel. So how do we do that? Well, what we can do is we can modify this clip before we edit it in. And to modify it, I'm going to right-click over the thumbnail, right? Your HFVO clip, I'm going to right-click over it. And I'm going to come down to the middle of the menu where it says Clip Attributes. So go ahead and open up that Clip Attributes window. The Clip Attributes window is a window where you can modify different aspects of a clip. Modify the video aspects, the time code, the name. There's also an audio tab. Click on the audio tab. Here you can see you have a stereo clip and it has embedded channel 1 and 2. But I don't need this to be a stereo clip. So in the lower half there where it says stereo, we're going to click on the menu and choose mono. So now we have a mono clip, but it's going to use embedded channel 1. Embedded channel 1 is the top left channel. I wanted to use embedded channel 2. So I'm going to, from where it says embedded channel 1, choose embedded channel 2. So now when we save this and click OK, you'll have a mono clip with embedded channel 2. This does not change the clip on disk. The clip on disk is the clip on disk. We can change it back to be a stereo clip at any time. But for our purpose and editing it into this timeline, this is what we need it to be. Once you've chosen mono embedded channel 2, come down to the bottom of the menu and click on the bottom of the window and click OK. Now look at the preview in that preview player above the clip. You can see it's now a mono clip. And all I'm going to do is drag this HFVO clip right to the beginning of my playhead. So match up the beginning of the clip to the beginning of the playhead on that VO track, and you've edited it in. Everyone good with that? I'm going to listen to this just by playing it. You don't have to play it if you don't want, but I'm going to play it here for you.
In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers once again.
Okay, so there's our professional voiceover talent. Sounds pretty good. It sounds good in the mix. But what I'd like you to do is take a closer listen to this. Come over to your VO track and solo it. We just have 2 more things we want to do to this segment, and then we'll end for the day. So come over to your VO track and solo it. Come back and play this clip
In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers once again.
If you have headphones, you might hear it a little bit easier than if you have no headphones. There's a distinct hum in the background of this recording. You may have to listen to it again to try and hear it. So go ahead and listen to it again. If you have headphones, listen carefully in the headphones.
In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers once again.
You can definitely hear it when the voiceover stops. You can hear that hum just cuts right out. That is a very distinct hum. It's called a 60 cycle hum here in North America, right? Or anywhere where the electricity runs at 60 hertz. If you're in a country where the electricity runs at 50 hertz, then it's called a 50 cycle hum. And that is caused when an electrical cable interferes with the recording cable, right? The electricity, the current interferes with your audio recording, and you get this very distinct hum sound. It's so distinct that they actually have filters that attempt to filter out that precise frequency, and they are called dehummers. So what we're going to do is apply a dehummer to this clip and see if we can remove that hum. The first thing I'm going to do is go up to the upper left-hand corner and click on the index to close up the index. And then to the left of the index button, I'm going to click on my effects library. My effects library opens up. If you want to close your media pool, you can do that as well. To the left of the effects library, click the media pool button. Now you just have a big window of your effects library. In the effects library, the third item from the top is a dehummer. These are all Fairlight effects that come with DaVinci Resolve. They're included in DaVinci Resolve. They're not in the studio version. These are all in the free version. We're going to take this dehummer, third one from the top, and drag it onto our HF VO clip in our timeline. Just drag and drop it on, just like we did the tilt shift blur. This time when you do that for this audio effect, it has a dedicated interface to deal with it. So it pops up automatically. It's actually fairly easy to deal with. So you don't have to know too much about this, but down below here, we're in the frequency area. You want to select 60 hertz. This was recorded here in North America, so the electricity is going to be 60 hertz. So you want to make sure that we're targeting the right frequency. To the right of that, you'll see the amount slider. How much do you want to cut out of that frequency? You know, if you drag that amount slider higher, the more of that frequency gets cut out. The problem with just dragging it all the way to the top is his voice has that same frequency in there. So the more you cut out that hum, the more you cut out that frequency in his voice as well. And a little bit of a balancing act. So you can't just go all the way to the maximum level. You'll have to listen to it over and over, adjusting the amount slider. The slope, sometimes these frequencies have other frequencies mixed in there. The slope is how much those other frequencies are playing a factor in that hum. So sometimes you might increase the slope and then back off the amount a little bit because there's more of those other frequencies mixed in there, other harmonics. So how do we do this and listen to it? Well, there's a nifty little tool up here in the upper right-hand corner of your 3-dot option menu in the dehummer window. In the upper right-hand corner, click that options menu, and there is a choice there that says loop preview. This is going to automatically loop the clip that you applied it to over and over and over and over again. And as it's playing, you can just come in and adjust the amount and the slope. So go ahead, take 5 seconds to do this little preview. I don't want you to spend a lot of time on this. We have one last thing to do after this. So just get the feel for it. Don't worry about really removing the hum. Just see what the amount does and the slope does as you loop the playback. When you're ready to turn off the loop, all you have to do is come back and choose loop preview.
In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers In the age of airplanes, we've become explorers.
All right. Hopefully you got that and got an idea of what that was like. When you have the effect done the way you like it, in the upper left-hand corner, click the little X to close the window. And that will put it away. It's good to know if you ever want to get back to it. All you have to do is select the clip in the timeline. Once you close that dehummer, you can just look up here. You don't have to follow along on this step. I just want to show you where it is in case you ever close the window, but then want to get back to the controls. All you have to do is up here in Zoom, move your playhead over the clip, select the clip in the timeline. Up in the upper right-hand corner is the inspector, similar inspector to what you have in the edit page. In the inspector, you'll see effects. When you've applied an effect from the effect library onto audio, the controls for the effect will show up here in the effect tab in the inspector. And here's my dehummer. It doesn't have the fancy interface, but it's the same controls: frequency, mode, amount, and slope. Right, so you can control it right here. We're going to close up the inspector. We don't need to control it. One last thing that we're going to do today is we're going to deal with the sync track. So turn off solo on the HFVO track and turn on sync on the solo on the sync track. We have one more problem to deal with, and that is on this sync track. And I don't know if you've noticed it as we've been doing this for the last 2 days, but if we really listen to his audio, there is a lot of noise on this track. So I'm going to play it for you. If you want to play it there, just make sure the sync track is soloed. Play it. If you have headphones, listen carefully. There's a lot of hiss on this track.
About how the airplanes changed the world. It was really important to go out and shoot the real world. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that.
Do you hear all the hiss in there? Hopefully you do. If you have headphones, it's a lot easier to hear it than if you don't have headphones. So how do we get rid of hiss? That isn't a 60 cycle hum. It's not that specific. Hiss could be anything, right? Could be just the recording. It could be something in the background. Could be an air conditioning sound. So how do we get rid of that? Well, to do that, what I'm going to do is open up my media pool. Now, if you don't have this, you'll have to go and find, I mean, you'll have it in this project, but in your projects, if you don't have this, then fire your sound person. But if you can't do that, you can usually find some room tone in between people speaking. But usually it's a good idea to have the person who's doing your sound record some room tone for every setup. We have a room tone clip in our media pool. So go and find that room tone clip. And all you want to do is drag it to the very end of the timeline on audio track 1, because audio track 1 is where our voice is, our sync track, right? So you want that same noise. Basically, we're editing a clip of noise onto the end of this track, just temporarily. You can see on the clip that you just dragged in there, that room tone clip, it has no waveform. That's because the noise is very low. So what you want to do is really drag the volume level. You can do this with the volume line. So the noise is pretty loud. You want that noise to be fairly loud, at least so you can see the waveform there. If you want to shift Z to see the entire clip, do that. All right, I'm going to move my playhead over the noise clip. If you play it, there's our noise. right? So how do we get rid of it? Well, there is an excellent noise reduction plugin that comes with Fairlight for this kind of thing. And not only can you apply it to a clip, you can apply any Fairlight effects to a track. So it will affect all the clips on the track. So you can apply just by dragging and dropping onto a clip, but let's come into our effects library, come down to where our noise reduction is located. And in order to apply it to the track, all we're going to do is drag the noise reduction right over to the track header where it says sync, right? We're like right underneath our solo button for the sync track. Just drag and drop it right there. When you do, this has a custom interface that pops up. It's very, very easy, lots of knobs, looks impressive. See the learn button right there? We're going to turn that on. Just click on that learn button. This is the way the learn button works. Basically, if you have some sample of the room tone like we have, the noise that you want to remove, you edit it onto the same track. When the learn button is enabled, when you play over the track, it will start to sample the noise, and you stop when you think you have a clear sound of the noise. So you can stop on this clip anywhere. And then learn will turn itself off, and basically noise reduction will be applied. So it's really just a matter of clicking the learn button, hitting play, and then pressing stop. So go ahead, click the learn button, press play, let it play for a second, and then stop. The purple that you'll see in the graph is the noise print that it's removing, right? The noise is going to be different all along here, but this is the sample noise print that it's going to be removing. So sometimes if you don't think you've got a good sample, you might try it again, click learn, play again. But once you do that, you don't have to do anything else. You can just close the window, come back to the beginning of your timeline and play and listen and hear how much better his voice will sound.
How the airplanes changed the world. It was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
And if you have headphones, you'll hear a lot less noise in the clip. And at this point, you could go in and get rid of your room tone if you think you did a good enough job, because the noise reduction isn't applied to the clip, it's applied to the track. Everyone get that? Even with our little mistakes, we're going to end this 20 minutes early, which is good for us. I really thank all of you for joining me, especially those who had to get up early or staying up late. For those of you who found it hard to get off the couch from the Cartoon Network and join us here, I do appreciate it. I know Arthur and Diego appreciate it too. Tomorrow we're going to start again at the same time. We're going to dive into the cut page. We'll stay here for about 5 more minutes to finish up any questions we have lingering. But thank you again for joining us, and hope to see you tomorrow.